Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, October 25th, 2022. The time is 7:02. Before we begin, I just want to ensure that everyone is very clear about using their microphones. Board members and members of the public who come to speak, please be sure that your microphone is directly in front of your face and that you speak clearly into it. One of our recent minutes had several comments that were inaudible. Our agenda continues with roll call. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Joe Murphy.
Here.
Paul Jordan.
Here.
Robin Pothier. Here. Peter DiStefano.
Here.
Elizabeth Karp.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. This consists of approval of minutes from September 20, 2022 work session, September 27, 2022 regular session, and the report of the administrative officer. If there are no corrections or additions, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I think there is a correction that needs to be made.
Go ahead, Robin, you have the floor.
The September 27th, it's Mr. Matthews, I believe, but he shows up as Mr. Mathewson through most of the document.
What page is that on?
The back side of the front page, it starts, so he starts as Matthews and moves on to Mathewson on the 27th meeting.
Thank you, so noted. Anything else? Susan?
Sorry, on the same minutes, on page 2, at the very, very bottom, it mentions, it's in the hospital section. The last line says Town Farm Online. Do we know what, I don't know what that is.
What page are you on, Susan?
Number 2, this is the September 27th minutes, the very, very last line on page 2.
Town Farm Online.
Is that a typo, or is that a thing I don't know about?
I think it's a new phrase that means on board.
Jamie, do you have any clarification for this?
Checking it right now, Madam Chair.
I guess the question is it a colloquial expression or a specific
I believe the
reference?
terminology is on board.
On board. Everyone got that? On board.
Thank you.
If there are no other corrections or additions, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Robin
Second.
to approve this consent agenda, second from Paul. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Our next agenda item is major subdivision pre-application concept plan, Cohen Major Subdivision, proposed two-lot subdivision with waivers requested for flexible frontage and request to combine conceptual master plan and preliminary plan review stages. Is there anyone representing the applicant? Please come up to the mic and state your name for the record.
I'm Cecile Cohen, live in Perryville. Applicant. An applicant. Haven't done this before.
Please continue. What can you tell us about your project?
Well, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm getting in what we might call the senior years. And my husband and I, right now, the house has gotten too big for us. We have approximately 12 acres of land. When we originally built, 41 years ago, the zoning in Perryville was 1 acre zoning. It's now 2 acre zoning. And we have approximately a 7 acre field that I would like to utilize. It shows on the plan as proposed lot to build a small one-level home where we could reside. And because it's now 2-acre zoning, we're requesting the flexible yield because we don't have a full 200 feet on the road for our existing driveway.
And does the gentleman next to you wish to speak to this pre-application?
This is
Just
Mark.
state your name if you do.
Sure, I'm Mark Dowdell, Dowdell Engineering.
Mr. Dowdell, do you have any comments or questions for the board?
Nothing, I really don't have anything too specific, other than you can see our set of plans. It's 3 sheets. We have the existing conditions plan, the yield plan, and the proposed conditions plan. Yeah, we're just proposing this new lot. The area that's shown as a proposed lot is a cleared field right now. You can see that we're proposing the driveway to come down similarly to the way it's coming down right now, with a bit of screening on the west side, so that we can get that separation between the two abutters. And yeah, we're just requesting that this go through.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members?
Madam Chair, real briefly, so the plan had been revised. There was a technical issue with the plan set that you received. The yield plan didn't show appropriate frontage. I spoke with Mr. Dowdell. He revised the plan and sent it back to me. The yield plan does yield 3 lots in a conventional subdivision. The plan that you have, I believe, shows 4. But the frontage is less than what's required in the ordinance. So Mr. Dowdell corrected that, and from staff's perspective, this meets all the requirements for a flexible frontage project with 2 lots. It has enough developable area, wetlands are a non-issue, and they are utilizing a shared driveway configuration so that they don't have a second curb cut along the frontage.
Thanks, Jay. And just to remind board members and members of the public that a pre-application is just an opportunity to share information. There aren't any specific requirements associated with it. Joe?
What is the proposed width for the driveway easement? And are you proposing any markings or monumentation such that there'll be no future disputes to that easement?
Not on the plan currently. We don't have proposed monumentation. I can check on, yeah, I'd need to just see what the, I believe it's a 20-foot width.
You're going to be coming back at some point, right? So at that point, if you can have what the proposed width is, and I know I personally would like to see some type of markings or monumentation so there's no future disputes
Correct.
on that easement.
Okay.
I certainly don't want any future disputes either.
Other comments, questions? Anything from Susan?
Hi, I have a little question, and I think this is more for my curiosity. It looks like the field to the south is being farmed, and your line cuts across the middle of it. I'm sorry, to the one to the right.
No one is farming it.
The open fields there?
It's just an open field. It used to be farmed years ago. Someone keeps going in very nicely and mowing it for us, but I haven't got a clue who's doing it. And I know my neighbors.
Right.
I think it may be the son of the person who used to farm it.
Yep. I was just curious. Thank you.
Find out who's mowing it for me.
Anything from staff? Jamie?
Madam Chair, the only other thing to potentially consider, because we've seen this come in on a few other applications, their intent and what they are explaining to you is they're proposing a shared driveway. I think the planning board in the recent past has seen people coming back after multiple years to do something other than that combined driveway, which was pertinent to the discussion of flexible frontage and why planning boards are making decisions. So I think if they're proposing to do something that you potentially limit the ability to have 2 separate driveways, I think the question we always get, if, Jay, Brian, and I are sitting here 6 years from now, and someone says, well, we want to build our own driveway. And your thinking as planning board members is this was intended to be a shared driveway. Is that in perpetuity, or is that for this process now? It's the only thing I'd ask the applicant to explore.
Is that something you folks have thought about?
Having an additional driveway?
Yes, versus the single one associated with the FDRP.
We haven't explored it fully yet, no.
Then I have a question for you, Jamie. Then, is Watson Lane public roadway, and could, if it were necessary, a driveway come in off of Watson Lane to access the property in the future if necessary?
Could I say something to that? That,
Certainly.
that is actually a driveway to what was my in-laws' property where my husband grew up. And it was news to me when it showed up as Watson Lane. It only goes down to the one house. It used to be, in the old records, where the local farmers would bring their cows to water at the brook.
The proverbial cart path.
It's a little wider than a cart path.
I think just to answer Ms. Axelrod's question, I'm not aware of any regulatory provision that would prevent them, if the neighbor allowed, to do a shared driveway on Watson Lane at some point in the future. I think what you've seen on some of your developments is limiting the ability, either with an easement, to limit access to Post Road if it's intended to be a shared driveway, that there's some potential prohibition of between splitting that at some point in the future. Again, if that's the intent of the planning board in making their decision.
Thanks, Jamie. Any other questions, comments?
Could I say one other thing?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. The existing driveway right now to my house is about 800 feet long. The only portion that we're talking about is coming in maybe 30 feet. Am I right on that, Mark?
Where are you talking about exactly? Say that again.
To get to my house right now is an 800-foot-long driveway, which is another reason I would like to do this, because in the winter it gets a little scary now. Coming in, the shared portion to access the proposed lot, that's only coming in maybe 30.
No, that's 3. Is it 300? Or it's like 170
I can't tell.
feet or so.
I would say it's approximately 200 feet in length is your easement.
The easement itself is about, 200 feet or so.
Okay, thank you. I'm not good at doing these things. So it would only be that portion that would be shared, and we don't want to see another curb cut. We like our little village of Perryville, which is nice and quiet, with not a lot of traffic.
Understood, thank you. Any further comments from staff? Joe?
No, just on the next go-around, when you actually indicate on the drawings the width of the easement, since it is approximately 200 feet, if it's wide enough for 2 cars to pass, that would be great.
Sure.
If there are no other comments, this applicant has asked for a combined review. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants the request of the applicant, Cecile Cohen, to combine the conceptual master plan and preliminary plan stages of review for the proposed major subdivision located at 2400 Post Road, Assessors Plat 79-2, Lot 5. The applicant shall be required to meet the application requirements of both the conceptual master plan and preliminary plan stages of review prior to scheduling the required public hearing.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a public hearing advisory development plan review for Silver Spring Marina. The applicant has requested that this public hearing be continued to the November 22nd, 2022 regular meeting. Would someone like to make a motion for that continuation?
Second.
We have a motion from Peter, a second from Paul. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment? On the Silver
For
Spring
what particular
application?
item? Oh, Silver Spring? And you know that we just continued, yes?
I did, but I didn't get up here in time, but I'd just like to make it, it won't affect your.
I just want to check with legal counsel if that's acceptable.
I think you can comment, but it's not considered part of the public hearing.
That's fine,
Yes.
that's fine. So my son Joseph and
But
his
just
wife-
restate your name, please.
I'm sorry, Richard Pastor. For the record, RP Engineering, I'm a registered PE in the state. My son Joseph and his wife Ann live contiguously on the south side of the marina. And my point is, we have issues with the proposal, but we won't get into that now because it's not part of the record. I was just wondering how many times they're going to continue this, because we've been here twice so far.
Unfortunately, we are not privy to that information unless staff has some additional information, and certainly it would be advised that you come to our meeting on November
We
27th.
will definitely be there.
Jay?
Madam Chair, as we were scheduling the application for the planning board and going through the details of the document, it was determined that the proposed height of the building was too high. The applicant was not aware of that. We made the applicant aware of it. They had to go back to their design team and work to find a solution to lower the height of the building by approximately 3.5 feet, I believe it was. So that's the reason for the delay. It was something that was not caught early on. When we brought it to their attention, they had no intention of asking for a height variance, so they were going back to the drawing board to reduce the height of the proposed building.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, a change to a previously approved plan, major subdivision comprehensive permit, the Village at Curtis Corner. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sanford J. Resnick, and I'm the attorney for the applicant. The applicant received approval in April of 2022 for a comprehensive permit. 8 of the buildings have a low and moderate income unit, and the decision that was rendered by the board, basically at the request of the applicant, to have these low and moderate income rental units. The purpose tonight is a very simple purpose, and that is to request that the board also allow an amended decision to have them either sold or rented. Without going into a lot of detail, the market's changed. We have people now interested in buying units and actually giving the units, for example, to a parent. And if the parent didn't own the unit, if they want to own the unit, they can't occupy the unit because they're not a rental. So I think we've had 2 people looking at that. And as you probably know, with the rates doubled, we're getting different units. And in fact, we've discussed that with Melina today. There's just a lot of changes in the market, and I think it would be in the best interest of the applicant and the town that we get these low and moderate income units occupied. So not much I can say other than that.
So just to clarify your comments, there is a desire to convey some of these units to family members rather than on a rental basis. And how does that work with the request for sale as well?
So the sale would be that I could give my parents the money, they could buy the unit, but they can't occupy the unit. So what they would do is they would occupy the unit. They're allowed to rent the unit. That's a calculation. And with their income, they could own the unit and they could still get rental from the unit up to point whatever that rental figure is. So that's different than the investor. And we have those. Investor comes in, he buys the building, and he rents both units.
And of course, with the understanding they meet the criteria.
Absolutely.
Low, moderate
Right.
income.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Questions from board members? Paul?
It's been a while. I'm trying to remember what the AMI on the rentals was going to be, who would qualify? Was it 80% or 100 or?
So,
Rentals are 80% by law.
Rentals, okay, so
I've got the decision, I can't find it.
I guess what I would prefer to see here is that if we're going to sell them instead, that we stay at the 80% AMI on the sale of the low-income units.
Jay, do you have that information for us? Okay,
That's all.
thanks, Paul. Other thoughts, comments? Joe?
Well, a couple thoughts. One of them is for your staff. When we have a project like this and there's a change to the LMI portion, it would be good if it could go in front of the Affordable Housing Commission. The Affordable Housing Commission is advisory to the planning board. They have the responsibility to keep abreast of what the needs of the community are, hopefully keeping abreast of the needs of the community of rentals versus home ownership, what size rentals, et cetera. So it would be good to get their thoughts on this as we look to make some changes. Second of all, I do agree with Paul. When we look at a comprehensive permit, and when this board evaluates a comprehensive permit, we look at the balancing the needs of the community and the impact to the community versus what is the beneficial to the community. And in this particular case, if we had looked at 80% for rental, there was a certain demographic, there was a certain demographic in this community we were trying to benefit, trying to meet their requirements. So if we're going to switch that to ownership, with no other changes proposed or nothing else being proposed by the builder, I would request that that same demographic be met, meaning that we'd stay at the 80% for the AMI.
Thanks, Joe. Other thoughts, comments?
Could I ask you a
Robin,
question?
go ahead.
I'm a little confused. So are we proposing that the unit could be sold to anyone who would then turn around and rent it out as an LMI unit?
That was always the intent, is that an investor could come in and rent one unit to low and moderate income and the other unit to a market rate. What we're finding now, we've got people who are interested in buying the unit and buying the unit in a family person's name, a child or a parent, but they can't occupy it. Now, when you're talking about the low and moderate income and the percentages, when this decision was rendered, both at the preliminary and the final level, they did discuss the whole issue of, and I want to see if I can get it here, of the low and moderate income sales versus the low and moderate income units. And there's a section in here where they discuss that. And again, if you would read this, you'd be a little mixed up by the decision, but it's pretty clear in here that they had analyzed it from both ways. So just give me a second. Yeah, go ahead, you can have lunch.
May I speak?
Yes, please state your name for the record.
My name is Alex Petrucci. I own 5A Builders. I want to bring you guys back up 3 years.
And please try to be as concise as possible.
Excuse me?
Please try to be as concise as possible.
Well, I'm going to be very concise as possible. 3 years ago, I brought you this project. I told you from the beginning that we were looking at this project because we were looking for market rate affordable housing for a lot of blue-collar workers, people in town. I was brought from a lot of different parents and a lot of people about the pricing housing. So we came up with this idea of building the lower-income homes, trying to keep the prices low. Interest rates are at 2.5%. Well, the world changed as this project took to get approved and get built, and the world changed. We all know that. I started realizing with my brokers and my people that I had a guy come to me, and this is where it hit me, and said to me, I've been qualified as an affordable buyer. I'd like to buy and live in that duplex and rent the front out. And I said to him, I don't know if I can do that. So I checked with Sandy, and sure enough, there was a little problem with that. The person said to me, you are discriminating against me because I'm an affordable buyer? And I said, well, it was proved that way. And he was pretty upset with me. This particular gentleman, his parents would give him the money to buy the unit. Matter of fact, buy the whole building. And he wanted to live in the affordable, and he wanted to rent out the front. And he said that his parents were snowbirds, so they might stay there in the summer months and stay in Florida in the winter months. Or he might rent it. I said, I'll have to get back to you. I got to talk with my attorneys. I find out that that wasn't going to be possible. So I sat down with Mr. Robert, and we figured out that, and the lady that is in charge of the affordable housings, she thought the way it was approved was a disaster. I got to admit, we made a mistake. I made a mistake. This needs to be corrected. We need to give people the right. If they want to buy, if they want to rent, we shouldn't have the right to tell anybody that they can't buy because they are unfortunate because they're an affordable buyer. It's just not fair. It's like you and me walking in a market, and if you had a red shirt on, we don't allow to sell meat to a person with a red shirt. It's discrimination. And that's what we're causing right now. So what I was thinking was that all we have to do is change the wording from it could be rented or it could be bought. But it still is an affordable unit. They still have to qualify. They still have to go through the same procedure, either way if they rent or they buy. And that's where I am with this. And if you guys could help me out, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And Mr. Petrucci, when you made reference to the person in charge of affordable housing, were you talking about the monitoring agent?
Yes.
Jay, do you have our information yet?
Madam Chair, what's on the screen is a copy of the preliminary plan decision, and that's condition number 4, which states that it should be 100% of the area median income. There's also a reference in the last sentence that it offered for a lease no more than 80% AMI.
Yes.
That said, I'm not sure what we're being asked here. It looks like you could do either. Well, I'm not sure what the question is. It looks like based on this approval, you're free to do either. I'm not sure.
That's in the final decision, it discussed what the criteria was for a sale, what the criteria was for a rental, and then there's the statement that you shall rent them. So it was just, there's some inconsistent statements in there, and I'm not blaming any because I'm not so sure it was a mistake. I think when the application was made, At that time, the applicant was asking for the rentals. They analyzed the rental, they analyzed the sale, then they made the statement. They can only rent. So all we really want to do is to take their analyzing and take the step, okay, you can do either one. And they've analyzed both.
So my recollection was that the affordable units, we were going to have a mix of single-family affordable homes and duplexes where there would be sort of a larger unit and a smaller unit that were part of the duplex. The smaller unit would be the affordable unit. So now we're talking about selling that affordable unit as a condo, or
No, it's a
somebody
building.
buying the whole?
And Mr. Resnick, just
These
state your
units,
name
excuse
and
me, sir,
reply
these
so
units
that-
approximate the exact
and
same
Miss-
size
Mr. Petrucci?
in quality.
Mr. Petrucci, so that the record is clear, if either of you speak, can you please state your name, even though we know who you are? Paul, did that answer your question? And I'm going to ask Amy for some clarification, either or Jamie.
I will wait for further clarification. Thank you.
Thanks.
Jay, exactly what are we looking at? Are we looking at a condition of approval that the board considered, or are we looking at a condition of approval that was what we approved after discussion?
So if I can, Madam Chair.
Yes, please, Jamie.
There's two components to the language here. What you see in item number 4 is this is contained, I believe, Jay, within the findings section. And approval is based on the provision of 25% subsidized housing units available for LMI residents. And then you have could be sold at 100% or could be rented at 80% of AMI and deed restricted for a period of 99 years. In the approval conditions, it says rent only. So the finding was the condition only passed through on rental of the affordable side. So I think what Attorney Resnick is asking on behalf of Mr. Petrucci is the ability to take that duplex and have someone purchase side A or side B. One of the sides has to be, if it was a for sale, has to be sold at 100% of the AMI, but then it also could be rented at 80% of the AMI. There's a choice. But in the end, the same amount of units will be brought to the marketplace. So you have a duplex that right now would have to be purchased by one person owning both sides, who then can only rent one side at affordable. Right? Someone cannot buy the affordable side independently of the entire structure containing 2 units. This gives someone the ability to own half of a duplex within a development where under the current approvals, they have no ability to purchase fee simple deed 1/2 of a unit.
Amy, are we making or proposing a change to correct a error on our part, meaning the town, or are we looking at a change to a condition of approval that is valid, but now the builder wants relief from? What are we actually doing here?
I think the best way for the board to evaluate this application now is think about it almost as a new application. It's not clearly, and I think you're bound by the findings that you've already made with respect to this development. But when you look at this revised proposal of all the units being for sale units, does that development proposal satisfy the required findings of the LMI Housing Act? I think you can probably rely on the findings of the original proposal. I don't know if you want to phrase it as the town made a mistake or it was revealed that it was an unworkable condition, but in any event, I think you should be guided by the town's affordable housing plan, to the extent that there's any difference in what the town wants to see for developments containing affordable housing, do we care to what, if any, is the extent to which we care about, do we need more LMI rental units or more LMI sale units?
Amy, I don't think it was a mistake on the part of the town per se, but there was an understanding of the need to have more rental units, and of course, then it's 80% AMI.
So then I think, you're guided again because this is a comprehensive permit application, you have to evaluate this request and this amended proposal under the standards of the LMI Housing Act. And I'll just remind you what I advised you a couple months ago. The LMI Housing Act has now been changed to add additional hurdles to the permissible reasons to deny an application. So the intent of those amendments were to make it harder for planning boards to deny comp permit applications.
I mean, I don't think in this case we're looking at denying an application. Either way, we're going to have 8 LMI units. So we're not looking to deny an application. I think the real question is that if the board at the time considered the balance between the benefits to the town, to the impacts to the town, and we made that decision based on an 80% of the area median income, that is what we made our decision when we made that balance. Are we on solid ground to say that we want that demographic to continue to be served, and therefore, if we do sell them, we want them to meet that demographic, which is what we originally considered during our deliberations to make the decision on this particular application.
That would be placing a condition on the approval, because under the law, the AMI for ownership units can be as high as 120%. And we had 100% as a ceiling on AMI for ownership units in the prior approval. So I think to the extent you want to now bump that down to 80%, I think you're going to need to justify that with specific findings from our affordable housing plan.
And I just say on the comprehensive permits that we evaluated in the future, right? I mean, in the past, the comprehensive permit and the applicant can propose pretty much anything. So he can propose a density incentive that's 10%, 25%, 200%, 400%. And each one of those, as that goes up higher, has more of an impact to the community. And what this board has done in the past, as that impact has gone up on the community, we've looked for the developer to provide more benefit to the community. So that whole balancing between the density, and that is a pretty high density in that area, what he proposed. I've had people tell me that it's changed the character of the neighborhood. So that density deliberation was based on serving that demographic, which truthfully, we don't have a lot of projects relative to rentals in this community, unless it's URI rentals, and there's a real need. And 2, when we have other projects, whether they be, any type of comprehensive, the developer typically proposes anywhere from 100 to 120%, and a lot of times 120%. So there's very little other projects that we have in this community that meets that demographic. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Joe. Paul?
Yeah, and I'm on board with what Joe said. I think, when we looked at this, we had an idea in mind, and I think meeting that 80% target, and then, particularly since this is a condo, now you're adding condo fees on top of, the income. I would like to see, if we're going to approve these for sale as condos, at 80% AMI.
Excuse me. Can I say something?
Name again, please.
Alex Petrucci here. One of the other subdivisions that I did had a couple of affordable, just for instance, had 2 affordable units, which I built, and they were bought. One of them were bought by an investor. The investor had the right to rent it. So he rented it to an affordable qualify. The other one was sold to a young lady, which I helped finance because she was an affordable buyer and she didn't have the down payment, so I helped her. And so my point is, what is the difference between that project and this project? You're going to sit here and tell me that you're going to discriminate against an affordable buyer that wants to buy one of these units. Now, what's going to happen when that affordable buyer files a lawsuit? I'm going to get sued because I can't give them an affordable house that they could buy. Okay, I know it's in the decision, but it was a mistake. I'm almost positive it was a mistake. There was no way that I would ever agree to make it so I can't sell an affordable building to an affordable buyer. On top of that, isn't the whole idea of this project to bring 8 affordable units on board? Do you know that there's a restriction on this project that only one for every duplex, only 2 or 4 market rates can be CO'd? So if I can't sell the affordables, I can't build the rest of the houses. So that means that the project could get shut down. And you're not going to get any affordables. So if you want to sit here all night long and not give me what I want, then we'll go somewhere else with it and and I'll appeal it to Shad. But this is definitely a mistake. And why I'm got you, I have the young lady, which is an expert in this field, that you should listen to before you make any more of your silly decisions.
Mr. Petrucci?
Okay?
If we could keep the discourse civil and calm, it would be much more effective. Ms. Lodge, I'm sure, has some comments for us.
Thank you. Melina Lodge, Executive Director of the Housing Network and Community Housing Land Trust. I serve as the monitoring agent for this property, and I think I can provide a little bit of clarification around what is being asked here. I think in the review of the application as it came forth looking for a monitoring agent, there were some challenges with the property as it was structured with an ownership unit that was unrestricted and a restricted rental unit. Simply works out to be a math problem, is that because the units are almost equally sized and the rent income would be restricted, the homeowner in the unit actually ends up subsidizing the rental component. So it's not a highly attractive offer for somebody outside of an investment portfolio. And while there is a demand for people who would like to put family members, those family members need to meet certain conditions to fall into these units. So it isn't just a shoo-in because you are a family member that you may reside in these units. So it was suggested by myself that a way to work these things out would be to leave some flexibility for if there is an investor who would like to purchase the duplex, they can rent 1 unit at market rate. The affordable unit currently is priced at $1,740 a month, is the affordable rental rate, including all the utilities. So not, super low. And that can be problematic for some folks for sure. On the homeownership side, your decision actually allows, either or. So you've already codified that you'd allow for 100%. In today's interest market, that prices out to be $268,000 for a homeownership unit, which in a quick scan of what's available in South Kingstown, there are very limited opportunities at that price point. So I think allowing this flexibility would in fact open up the market for people who are looking to purchase at 100%, which for a household of 3 is about $88,000 gross income. I think the developer is simply asking for the flexibility to allow for either situation, all of which translates to the municipality getting a low mod unit. So I think, to your council's point, It's whether you really want to hold fast on rental units that may not potentially rent because of the ability for someone to purchase the unit and make the math work on how it, home ownership with a rental attached, right? There's usually people buy multifamily properties to help subsidize their mortgage, not to help subsidize the rent. So I think it's really only attractive for an investor. But I'm happy to answer any technical questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lodge, and I'm sure that you understand that this board brought up the concerns that you have related at the onset of this project.
I'm certain I was not involved. I was brought in very late in the game. I would have advised against this particular structure earlier, but here I am today.
Peter?
At 100%, these would sell for how much?
Based on current interest rates, we're looking at 6.94% as of the Fannie Mae index today. That price is at $268,000 and some change would be the maximum resale price of a home ownership unit, which would be really just one half of the duplex.
Wow. I think we're doing our community a disservice if we don't allow a house to sell for $260,000.
Yes. Other thoughts, Susan?
Hi, I have thoughts, and I'm not sure who I should ask these questions to. So we conceded that the 16 single-family houses wouldn't need to be included in the fair and equitable division of LMI units in this project. But the original premise was that a homeowner would purchase the entire duplex and then work out amongst himself whether he would choose to live in the back unit or the front unit. And so I think we were okay with that. But I believe that this new application implies that the LMI units will all be the back units, which don't have a garage and don't have a front porch and aren't visible from the street. And I'm concerned about the equitable nature of having now all of the LMI units be the backyard condo and all of the market rate units be the front yard that also has street frontage, a front porch, and a garage. And so I looked at a memo that was written for us by our attorney back in December of 2020, and he said that LMI units do not need to be exactly the same size as all the other market rate units, but it does mean the LMI units should not stick out or be treated as less important than the market rate units. And it's been my understanding as long as we've been on the board that the whole goal of market rate developments and with LMI units is that if you drive down the street, you won't be able to pick out which ones amongst the development are the LMI affordable units and which one are market rate. But I think the way this is proposed, if all of the LMI units are the ones in the backyard, it certainly is a stigmatizing thing in this neighborhood to know exactly who paid what for their living quarters because it's the backyard folks that have the LMI units. So I would like to talk about having a 50-50 split with half of them being the front and half of them being the back, or potentially entire duplexes being affordable or not affordable, which would also, because there's 8 duplexes, would also divide it up equally. So you have an entire affordable structure or a 50-50 front yard, backyard thing. But I think it isn't equitable to not only have 16 2- and 3-bedroom houses that aren't included in the math, but also the front units aren't also
I agree.
market rate. So
There's
that's something I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, sure. There is a provision that talks about sort of integration and making sure that they're not visually, distinct. I would add that these are in the back, so they're really going to be less visible, but you've actually already restricted the units. Part of the project moving forward, there was a condition already imposed that the rear units were already deed restricted. So you've already recorded a deed restriction on this property for the back for Unit B. So you've already done that thing. Now it's just really assessing what is the use of that property.
We have recorded as the deed restricted unit would be the back, because I distinctly remember meetings where Mr. Petrucci stated that the person who buys the duplex could decide which half he wanted to live in and which half would be affordable. That it was not a predetermined decision, that the affordable units were the ones out in the back.
I'd like to hear thoughts from Amy on this.
I don't,
You'll have a chance after our legal counsel answers the question. Amy?
I don't recall, I would have reviewed the deed restriction. I don't recall the specifics of whether the deed restriction said the LMI units to be the back units. It seems like we did approve it with the LMI units not being fixed as either the front or the back. So I do think we are bound by our prior approval to the extent that under that prior approval, at least in the recorded decision, notwithstanding what Mr. Petrucci may or may not have said at a meeting, I do think we're bound by our finding of the floating LMI unit. And the specific statutory language is that they have to be integrated with throughout the development and compatible in scale and architectural style. So I think there is room within the statute for the LMI units to have different amenities than market rate units, such as garages and front yards. That being said, I think the board is entitled to rely to some degree on any statements that the developer makes on the record. I think in the future we'll have to be more careful about what gets into the written decision, because that's really what limits us on conditions and reviewing legal documents.
Right, it appears that based on the decision, there is inherent flexibility, which is actually what Mr. Petrucci wants.
I think that's right.
I have a copy of the recorded deed restriction here if you'd like to see where it identifies Unit B.
Jamie?
Madam Chair, I believe during the prior permitting process, there was a discussion on the market rate units being in the front with the garages and the affordable units.
Could you folks just back up a little so that Jamie's rather quiet voice is picked up on the record? Folks?
I just want to tell them.
Jamie?
Madam
Excuse me,
Chair,
can I speak?
Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director.
After the planning director has had his opportunity, yes.
So, Madam Chair, I do recall discussions during the prior approval process where the intent was that the market rate units would be front-facing with a garage, with a porch, but that the affordable units would be in the rear, who were afforded a deck with a slider overlooking the majority of the property. So I think potentially part of the balance that I recall being discussed was the rear unit had a larger kind of attribute, backyard, deck, and slider, and the front unit may have the garage, but they're also on the street, and they only have a porch without much access to the yard.
Yes, I recall that as well, but as Amy said, what is the most important criteria is what is stated in the decision. Jay?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just to expand on what Jamie was saying, in the final plan decision, if I can bring it up for a moment. Condition number 5, which you probably can't read very well, goes into discussions of the average sizes of the units and that the LMI units shall be within 5% of the market rate units, minimum square footage numbers. So I believe with what Jamie was recalling, that conversation, while it didn't directly make it into the findings, the conditions, this condition number 5 speaks to that discussion that had happened previously.
Sorry, but couldn't it be 5% in either direction?
The average size of the LMI duplex unit shall be within 5% of the size of the market rate duplex unit.
So it could be 5% larger.
So these conditions would then carry over regardless of whether they were rentals or sales, correct?
Yeah, I think the conditions on unit size are distinct from the conditions on sale versus rental and corresponding AMI.
So, Madam Chair, our recommendation on conditions of approval is all prior conditions associated with previous approval shall remain in full force and effect.
I have another question.
Go ahead. And then Mr. Petrucci.
Okay, so I have another question. I think if this project had been brought to us originally as all units for sale with condominium-style units, we would at that point have talked about which portion of the yards would be used by which tenants of the property in other projects of condominiums that we've approved, like on Holly Street or Matunic Beach condominiums. We've seen condominium agreements with us. We've seen all of that. Part of our approval process was sale and condominium agreements, as well as a delineation of which portions of the property are accessible, who will be doing the mowing, how much are the condominium fees, who's shoveling the driveway, all of those things that we have not reviewed because this was not brought to us as a condominium project.
Yeah, these really wouldn't be condominiums per se, because they're individual buildings, so they would either be bifurcated through like more of a Condo X model, or like a shared party wall agreement. We've done them multiple times. They're not really full-fledged condominiums, because a condominium would require a declaration and a condo association and all of the items you've just mentioned.
So if I have the back portion and you have the front portion, where is your barbecue grill and who's shoveling the driveway? Like, how is that all worked out?
Couldn't speak to the specifics.
I think we're getting a little into the weeds.
Yeah.
No, but that would be part of an approval of a shared unit, I think, because we have talked about other shared units and had to address all of those items.
There is a reference in the draft motion under conditions of approval number 2 that makes reference to a legal mechanism to ensure the proper maintenance of any and all common areas associated with the 2 units. So that may be something that should be discussed if necessary. Again, that can be modified, and perhaps that speaks to your concerns.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Petrucci, you have the floor.
To address your concerns, my dear. Number one, if you go to my spec sheet, you will see that unlike other affordables in your town, they don't have Formica counters, they don't have carpet, they don't have linoleum, they don't have no crown moldings, they don't have Mickey Mouse kitchen cabinets, what the other developers do to cut down the cost of the affordables. I don't do that. My realtor's here tonight, and he'll testify that everything that I give the market rate unit, I give to the affordable. I built this project to help people, not hurt people. And to address your argument about the back unit, the back unit gets an 8 by 10 or 12 by 10 by 12 sun deck, gets a backyard so the kids could play if they have a child. The front unit gets a garage. They get a front porch. So, and they all have the right to use the land that's around the property. I'm trying to make it as comfortable for the people in the back as the people in the front. So if you give the people in the back a deck and a backyard, you give people in the front a garage. So, I mean, and that's the way it was proposed. That's the way the drawings came to you. They came on these boards. I showed you what they looked like in the beginning. So you sit here tonight, and I don't even know why we have to discuss that. That's beyond. That ship sailed. I'm here for one reason. I'm going to leave here tonight, and I want to know if that couple from New York, the policeman from New York, with a set of parents that want to buy and live in the affordable part, and they're going to live in the front. Am I going to tell them tomorrow when I get on the phone, the town of South Kingston is not going to allow you to buy and live in that unit? That's what we're here for. I don't want to discuss anything else about this project. I came here for one reason. If you guys deny it, let's deny it and let's get it over with. If you're going to approve it, let's approve it. It's very simple. We were trying to help people. We're not here to hurt people. I've got 4 different buyers with the same problem, and I really don't want to get sued over this because it's a discrimination, absolute discrimination that I'm telling somebody because they're an affordable person they're not allowed to buy. you guys are gotta think about this. I really, you guys want this to work. You guys want the project to be pretty. You know that every project I do in this town is absolutely beautiful. I over-landscape everything. I make it look right. There isn't a project in this town that you guys can sit here and tell me that I didn't do to the best of my abilities. Hotels, shopping centers, marinas, and subdivisions. Not one project. Please, I'm asking each and every one of you to please think about what I'm saying, and let's get this project moving, and let's get it sold. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petrucci. I believe the board understands your request, and certainly board members have the ability to ask questions and make comments. So to that effect, is there anyone else who has a comment relative to this request?
You know,
Go ahead, Paul.
I started out saying I was wedded to the idea of the same number of units at 80% AMI, but I'm certainly not an expert on this. I would look more to Joe and to the testimony that we heard this evening from the monitoring agent. Having heard that, the price of the home, it is a condo, but what, $268,000, something along those lines. I feel more inclined to support this. Not sure if it's the right thing, but that's kind of the way I'm leaning.
Thanks, Paul. Anyone else before we go to the public? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? If there are no members of the public who wish to speak, would someone like to make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Motion from Peter, second from Paul. Any further discussion? Joe?
Not all the board members were here when we considered this project. The needs of the community are pretty diverse as far as affordable housing. I think it's pretty clear we have a need for one-bedroom housing, two-bedroom housing, three-bedroom housing. When we look at a comprehensive permit, the comprehensive permit regulations say that it has to be compatible in size and appearance. In the past, when considering comprehensive permits, what this board has looked at as that means, to the best of our ability, we try to make them as representative as possible to match the market rate. So if there's a project of multiple size houses, we look at the affordable to be at the same proportion as the market rate. If there's one bedroom or two bedroom market rate, then we look at the same proportion for the affordable. And we have done that with the thought that in order to meet the diversity of the community, the best way to do that is make sure that the affordable matches the market rate as they come. In this particular, and on several other projects, we've required that to be the same size, the same number of bedrooms, et cetera. In this particular project, at the comprehensive, at the conceptual phase, we talked about which units would be rentals and the size of those versus the market rate. And I think there was some interest for us to follow what we had done in the past and have those at the same proportion. However, one reason or another, we did not put that in our conditions of approval. And when we got to the next phase, which is the preliminary phase, there was a lot of discussion that the affordable were all just the rental and the smaller houses, and they were really just representing 1/3 of the market rates, with 2/3 of the market rates being bigger houses, single families, larger number of bedrooms. Unfortunately, at the time, I think with discussion from council, we looked at that and we felt that the developer was already vested and that we could not require that at that phase. That was something that we would have had to require at the preliminary stage. So in a lot of ways, the developer actually received more incentives than other projects that we have evaluated under the comprehensive permit. When we got to the, so once we accepted that, there was a lot of discussion relative to the compatibility and size and what that actually meant. And the board, I think, wanted to see the rental units or the back units be the same size. It says compatible, the law does, it doesn't say that it has to be the exact same size. There was discussion that due to the uniqueness of this project with the duplexes, that maybe the owner would have the front house and maybe they would want to add another bathroom. So there was a lot of discussion about the size, and again, even though we've in the past consistently required them to be the same size, we made that decision to allow them to be 5% larger because of the uniqueness of the project, and perhaps the front wanted to add additional bathroom. So there's been a lot of concessions right along the way. I'm not opposed at all with the sale versus the rental personally, but I do think that there's a certain demographic that was being met based on our deliberations, and I personally would like to see that demographic continue to be met. That's my feeling.
Thank you, Joe. We have a motion on the floor. Are there any additional comments? So the motion is to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Jamie, what is the timeframe associated with this request?
Again, you're reviewing it under the major subdivision comprehensive permit process. You received the application last month, so I believe you do have some additional time to potentially go to November. I'll defer to Jay on the exact timing of that. But again, staff did prepare a draft motion for you that, and, attempted to anticipate some of the questions you had this evening. I think one of the things we would potentially suggest to add to the language is just clarifying the discussion tonight on what can occur. And that is that one side of the proposed duplex unit may be sold at 100% of the AMI, deed restricted affordable, for a period of 99 years. Of that unit may be rented at 80% of the AMI and deed restricted for a period of 99 years. So we're
Can
gonna
I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Who would buy a unit at 100% AMI and then, you'd have to be qualified, and then you'd have to be willing to rent it out for less than, that particular provision doesn't make any sense to me.
Madam Chair, I know the hearing has closed. So, again, their request was to have the ability to sell a deed-restricted unit, affordable, or to rent one of the units for sale. Now, I think the provision wouldn't prevent an investor to buy it and then rent it, so long as it was affordable.
This is an and/or, right? I mean, they still
Yes.
can rent it.
That's what they're asking for, is the and/or.
Yeah, I just struggle how we do not approve something that allows a $270,000 home in South Kingston, especially when we keep talking about
68, right?
68, whatever it was. But I don't know.
Anyone else? What would the board like to see in terms of these conditions that we have before us? Jamie just suggested a clarification relative to what can occur, with one side potentially being 100% AMI at 99 years, and/or the other be a rental or a for sale.
And I just want to note the draft motion that was written up doesn't have all the required findings that are needed for approval of this as a comp permit application. So staff can
Yes, so,
present something that, yeah.
so you would advise that staff draft a more complete motion that can then be before the board prior to making a final decision. Having said that, are there any other conditions or concerns that board members have that they feel should be added to either the conditions or the findings? Now is the time. Susan? Joe?
Just condition of approval that they be sold no higher than 80% of the AMI.
Susan? Can we talk about that? Absolutely.
Well, so we've talked about the 100%, and Joe had just mentioned 80%. Can we change that now?
In my opinion, I think you're bound somewhat by your prior decision, which had ownership units at 100% of AMI. So to the extent you're going to change that now, I think you need to justify it with references to the town's affordable housing plan, which I don't think has changed since the prior version of the project was approved. So I'm suggesting, I guess it's legally possible, but I think you're going to need to do some homework on how that could be justified.
So to go back to Joe's discussion that, this was a comp permit and lengthy discussions, and that included a number of units at 80% AMI, and we're now losing that. Again, with a $268,000 home, maybe it washes out. Again, I don't know enough about this, but I think that sounds like the question that maybe staff can go back to the record and figure out what was it we were looking for when we approved this, and does that carry weight?
The only thing we can, this evening defer to is in your findings of that original motion, it discussed 100% AMI for sale, restricted for 99, and then 80% rental, restricted for 99. So that was discussed, and it made it into your findings. It didn't make it into the actual conditions of approval, but it was contained within your findings of your prior action.
And I will say, when or if SHAB were to review this, I think, as you know, SHAB, the purpose of SHAB and the LMI Housing Act was to increase the production of affordable housing. So I think in SHAB's view, to potentially deny or add a condition of approval that it can't go forward without units at 80%, I think SHAB might look at that and think, well, we need more affordable housing units, no matter what level they're at.
Any other thoughts with regard to staff's additions to the draft motion?
I have one.
Go ahead, Susan.
So if at any time in the future it's determined that the homeowners would need to kick into a condominium fund or fee to take care of this external maintenance, doesn't that need to be calculated before the before the house pricing is set? Like, isn't that part of the monthly payments thing, so if later it turns out there needs to be funding for exterior maintenance or whatever, doesn't that need to be determined ahead of time, what those fees would be?
So, Madam Chair, to answer Ms. Axelrod's question, with regards to the calculation, if it becomes consistent with the recommendation of our condition number 2, and there's some type of mechanism for maintenance, and there's a cost associated, that is factored into the rental ceiling. It's also factored into the for sale price. So it's part of that structure. So
that
again,
can't change in the future?
It is calculated. So if it's rental, that changes upon renewal of lease, potentially. If it's for sale, it's calculated at the date of sale, and then it's recalculated at a future date of sale. But it's not interim. So if the day someone purchases it and there's a common fee associated with maintenance of $100 a month, that's what is set and is fixed to the calculation of what is affordable. If it changes in year 3 or 4 of that person holding that mortgage, it can change. But it doesn't affect the fact that it was affordable when it was brought to the marketplace.
So might I suggest that board members consider a motion directing staff to prepare a motion for approval along with research with regard to findings versus conditions in the previous approval as it relates to the South Kingstown Affordable Housing Plan. Is everyone agreeable with that? Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Joe. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Madam
Thank you.
Madam Chair, a quick question. If it was possible, I know you don't like to add these to your work session, but if we had this available for you for that work session, it would just be a discussion on the proposed motion. Could we potentially work that into that agenda?
Are you thinking about a discussion and then a vote at the regular meeting that would follow the work session?
That's
or-
at your pleasure. I potentially, if we could work with council on this and have it prepared for you, potential review and action at your work session or discussion. Again, you could have it listed on your agenda item that way. And if you're not comfortable doing it that evening, it would be deferred to your next regularly scheduled meeting.
Opinions? Work session? Generally, we try not to have issues that we vote on at the work session, or we have a partial regular meeting along with the work session that same night if we're conducting specific business. So it's up to the board.
I feel like we have a lot of things to talk about at our next work session.
We probably do.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to add that we also have a number of large-scale projects coming in that are going to take a lot of time at regular sessions going forward over the next couple of months. So it would be good if we can kind of clear the deck a little bit at a work session to dedicate a significant amount of time.
If we can limit it to a brief amount of time, because I feel like work session stuff is piling up on us that we haven't addressed from last year, so.
Yes, true. So folks are comfortable with having this item as a work session agenda item with potential for a vote at the work session? Yes? Or continue it after the discussion to the regular meeting? Let's just be as clear as possible.
I just assume just do it.
Okay, that's fine.
Very good.
Madam Chair, we will do our best to prepare for that meeting.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you. So, Mr. Petrucci, our work session is November is it 15th, Jay?
November 8th, is that correct, Lynn? 15th, sorry. You were right, we changed that.
So we should have a complete draft motion available on the 15th.
Can I add one more little thing to this that you haven't closed, right?
Yes.
Yes, you have?
Yes, we have closed the public hearing.
I don't know, this one part of this that you guys don't know, that I just found out about.
Amy?
So, Amy,
Mr. Petrucci wants to
can
add.
can I add one more thing?
Why don't you reopen the public hearing to allow him to make another comment?
Motion to reopen the public hearing.
Motion from Paul, second from Peter. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Mr. Petrucci, you have the floor. You just reopen.
Thank you. Before I got involved with this this big affordable project, I should have met with this young lady here, because she's handling, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 of them. I don't know how many she handles. I didn't realize this, which was really upsetting. If a couple, a young person, an older people come to me, and let's say I sell the building to this gentleman here on the left, he buys the building, and he rents out the unit to this couple. They go to this young lady here and they get qualified. They have to make under so much money, and I think don't hold me to this, but I think it's around $62,000, something like that. They move down here, they come down, they love South Kingston, they're all excited, they're here, their rents are very inexpensive, they're retired. And then all of a sudden, in the course of that year, their government check goes up $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. The end of the 12 months, they have to go back to this young lady and get requalified because rentals have to be requalified every 12 months. They go back to this young lady, and this young lady says, I'm sorry, you're out of the income level. You need to move out. Talk about devastation. If a buyer that's an affordable buyer buys a unit, he gets qualified, she gets qualified, or him or her. 6 months into the house, they win the lottery. They win $100 million. They don't have to get out of their unit. They don't have to leave. They're there for life, 99 years if they want to stay. But if they want to get rid of it, they have to sell it to a affordable buyer. I think that's the most heartbreaking part of this whole thing on this rental side of it. And if I ever knew this, I wouldn't even put the word rental into this deal. I would have never known this. This is something I learned, and she'll testify that I sat in her office and my face hit the ground. I said, this can't be true. And she said, that's the law. That's not my law. That's not your law. That's not her law. That's the law of the state of Rhode Island. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petrucci. So it's an unfortunate disincentive with regard to the rental situation.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Motion from Paul to close the public hearing, second?
Second.
Second from Liz. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Generally, the board takes a 5-minute break around 9 o'clock, and although it is 25 past 8, is everyone interested in the 5-minute break? We'll be back in 5 minutes. Liz, Robin, Peter, Tim Manning, Town Manager. They're both doing great. So Kyle and James.
I think Kyle plans to do some of that, because he did a lot of moving. They love the moving. And it's hard to
Hi,
find out.
Liz Carr.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for volunteering. Good to see you. Oh, yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
This one,
You feel like you're being bullied.
You handle it so well.
in my
yeah.
office, really. We'll go around, right?
So, now you have a daughter.
Olivia. She went to Portland, graduated, she's living in New York now. Yeah, everything's good. I mean, it's like yesterday.
It was yesterday. What happened? Yeah, you're shrinking.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
They get older, we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, all right, we'll stay for the rest, see how the rest of the school. We moved a lot. About is, I remember there was a design, and basically, there was this odd job, and if someone wanted to add another bathroom, you basically just frame the wall this way instead of coming this way, and that was really the 5%. I agree. It's not. I totally agree. I mean, if it's red cedar shakes on the front and then brown in the back, there's a problem. If there, but I mean, from what he said, I mean, we've driven by it quite a few times, yeah. I mean, I remember the first day we walked in and talked about this project. I remember the first day we walked in and talked about this project, about how they were trying to afford it. I think when we were looking at it, I don't remember exactly how many units we got out of this, but most projects we get one or two. This one we got 8 or something like that. So like, we're talking about this dent we're trying to make in this. If we really want to make a dent in this, these are what we have to do. I have to look at we had 4. It's our lip service. I feel like we're better by consulting to say we're trying to help them. In reality, not trying to help them. So I think it's frustrated with the lip service. Every single house I've ever seen do, they're all the same. They're super high end, they're super middle of the road. All the same. You can't do nice work at that price. I mean, it's affordable, you know, they're vinyl houses, they're particle board. Like, I mean, I'm a snob about it, but I mean, there's, you know, it's not something that's just definitely where I would do, but like, you can build a house for like $280 a foot. I'm like, I can't even touch that. I don't even, you know, that's like, of course.
I said to my I feel like I need to apologize for asking for a motion to reopen the public hearing. I didn't want him to go home on the street.
I think this is the most upset he's gotten today.
I will say, every time he says, "I do beautiful work," I'm like,
It's perception, right? Like, I don't agree with that.
Hey, if you qualify, and you can get yourself a condo for $268 grand.
I can think of two people that work for me today that I'm gonna tell them to call them tomorrow.
Oh, my God.
I mean, they could afford it.
Thanks.
Let's start bringing the sleeping bag.
The Planning Board is continuing its regular meeting with our next agenda item, which is a public hearing development plan review for South County Healthcare System. And before we ask for the applicant, I just think it's important to state for the record that all participants in these public meetings should conduct themselves with civility and decorum. Planning boards can ask questions, raise concerns. They can opine on specifics based on their information and local knowledge, and just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. Thank you. Our next agenda item is South County Healthcare System. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman. Andrew Prescott, General Counsel for South County Health.
Good evening.
Good evening. I hope that those last comments weren't directed specifically to me. I think I've been on my
it's to
best
everyone,
behavior
believe me.
most of the time.
And we may have to reiterate them at future meetings.
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I know the hour is late, and you've put a lot of time in already this evening. I'll try to be brief. This is our second public hearing on South County Health's proposed institutional master plan. We have, again, in the audience, consultants available to answer your questions, including Mr. Robert Clinton from VHB and Mr. Sean, you're still here? Sean Green from NEMD Architects. We also have our board chair here, as well as a member of the board, members of the board, and a contingent of executives and employees from South County Health here this morning, this evening, geez. Just want to say a couple of things about where we are in these proceedings and our application. I think it's important to reiterate that the institutional master plan, as stated in the town's ordinance, is something that is to provide the town to use as a rational basis for decision-making regarding the long-term physical development of South County Health's campus. That's exactly what the ordinance governing the institutional master plan states. And in drafting the institutional master plan, South County Health spent many, many hours, worked very hard with consultants, and did its absolute best to articulate and put into writing the capital improvement plans that we have for the campus over the next 5 years or so. We asked the planning board this evening to approve the institutional master plan, and in doing so, we acknowledge that some of the projects described in the plan, not all, but some of the projects described in the plan, will increase the parking demand on our campus. Some by very, very small amounts, some by more of a considerable amount. And we also acknowledge that if we can't achieve sufficient parking expansion through the two primary routes that we've articulated in our plan, one being development of additional parking on Town Farm Park property that we would acquire via the land swap that's proposed. The second being demolition of a storage shed and using that area, which is contiguous to existing parking, for additional parking. That we would need to find alternatives to those two routes and identify them to the planning board, possibly, depending on the circumstances at the time, existent at the time, in an amendment to our master plan that would require your approval. But there are many interlocking and interweaving parts here in terms of the master plan. We don't have a crystal ball, nor do you, so it's hard to tell exactly what the circumstances will be in a year, 2, 3 from now, and what state we will be in at that time relative to our parking capacity. We have not detailed other alternative plans for increasing parking capacity because we don't have any that meet our anticipated parking demands in an economically feasible and operationally acceptable way. They just don't exist. Every time we talk about parking on our campus, somebody raises the prospect of a parking garage. And sometimes it's a neighbor to say, God forbid they ever try to build a parking garage on this property. And then the next time it's somebody saying, well, why aren't they building a parking garage? So we hear that sort of both ways. But it's unquestionably viewed, and I think appropriately so, by some neighbors as an absolute worst case and undesirable alternative. Significant reliance on off-site parking, on the other hand, is also extremely undesirable from our perspective. It is extremely costly. It badly damages our ability to retain employees. They do not want to come to work at South County Health and be shuttled to distant parking lots. They can instead go work at other healthcare institutions and make more money. And so that's a very bad option. It may be one, ultimately, in future years, if our 2 primary routes to increase parking capacity don't come to fruition, that we simply have to live with. That could happen. And in that case, again, if those two principal routes that I've described don't come to fruition, it is likely we will be back here with an amendment to our master plan, which identifies those alternative parking scenarios and demonstrates that there is adequate parking capacity to allow us to proceed with the various projects that we've articulated in our plan. We also want to acknowledge, I believe as we've done before, but I want to restate this again, that approval of the institutional master plan does not mean that we have all of the approvals that we need from the town to move forward with all of the projects that are stated and set forth in our institutional master plan. And you know, I hate to raise Town Farm Park again for reasons people can understand, but I will, because it's a good example. This institutional master plan does not in of itself give us permission to go ahead and develop parking on Town Farm Park. We would have to come back to the planning board for approvals to do that. And at that time, there will be the kind of detailed plans and detailed information about how that site would be laid out and how we would accomplish the parking on that site so that both the planning board and the public could weigh in and be heard. And we certainly, even before that point, would be working with the neighborhood to make sure we understood all the concerns and all the issues. So I just want to stress that we're not under any misapprehension that approving a plan, which is just that, a plan, is carte blanche to proceed with all of the projects that we've set forth in the plan. There are various types of approvals that would be required depending upon what particular project we're talking about, ranging from a building permit to the type of thing that would be required for Town Farm Park parking development. So I hope that's clear on the record. If it wasn't clear before, I want to make sure that everybody understands that. There were some questions that came up last time that I don't think we quite got to, or that have percolated up since, and I just want to quickly tick through those, so perhaps that will save us all some time this evening. The first question was, why does the VHB parking analysis rely on peak parking demand as sort of the basis for assessing what parking capacity require? Robert Clinton, the VHB engineer, is here this evening. He'll speak to that as soon as I finish off a couple of other questions. Another question that I think is percolated up is, why have we not submitted some detailed plans or schematics with relating to parking that might be, additional parking that might be put in at 85 Kenyon, which is across from our campus, not on our campus. The answer to that is that's a very different scenario from taking down a shed that's made out of sort of corrugated metal and putting parking in its place where there is already a lot of parking. It's contiguous to our parking. It's almost by definition a temporary structure. 85 Kenyon is across the street, not on our campus, directly between two homes, and would require demolishing a full-blown building, office building, quite a different undertaking in terms of magnitude, cost, expense, environmental concerns, and perhaps even the need for zoning relief. So that's why we haven't proposed that. It's not a desirable alternative, and it's much more difficult than getting rid of the storage shed, which we think will give us about 40 additional spaces. What about the archaeological survey that we had a little discussion about last time, and possible restrictions that may create with regard to the development of Town Farm Park? We absolutely acknowledge that there is this report that indicates that there is archaeological value to that site, and that excavation on that site ought to be substantially limited. And you will note, if you do not already know, that the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission has specifically said that an acceptable approach to developing parking on that site is to put fill over what exists there, as opposed to substantial excavation, as apparently was the case in some very early plans that were surfaced. So I will also add that we have scheduled meetings, or are scheduling meetings, with both John Brown at the Narragansett Tribe to discuss our long-term plans for that property, as well as officials and personnel from the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission. So believe me when I say that both the tribe and the Historic Preservation Commission will know everything about what we're planning to do there and what we've got on the table. And it will be required by the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission that we enter into a memorandum of understanding about any future excavation at that site, even after we do the initial construction of the site, with very limited excavation. So I just wanted to make sure that was on the table as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Clinton so he can address the peak parking issue.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Robert Clinton with the firm VHB. At the last meeting, there was some confusion about what was used for our baseline existing conditions for parking and traffic. I just wanted to go over that and kind of correct the record that there was a question that if we based our traffic and parking requirements based on the single highest peak summer volume of the year. What we did is we didn't do that. We looked at two conditions. Excuse me. The first condition was a non-summer average day. And on a non-summer average day, there's a peak hour for parking, and then there's a morning peak and an afternoon peak for traffic. So those are the conditions we looked at. It wasn't the peak time of the year. It's the 1 hour of the year when you have the most parking and most traffic. So that was on a typical average non-summer day. So then we applied two adjustment factors. Those adjustment factors were for the impacts of COVID. So the pre-COVID conditions, we haven't fully realized and gotten back to the pre-COVID conditions. So a factor was applied to get us back to the pre-COVID conditions on an average day. And then there's the hospital experiences a summer peak. So their demand in the summer for parking and traffic are a little bit higher during those summer months. So we did a factor based on that too. So it was based on a non-summer condition, an average typical non-summer condition, the peak hour of the day. So every day during those it fluctuates a little bit, but that's an average typical day, the peak parking demand and the peak AM, PM peaks. And then we looked at typical summer day, not the worst day of the summer, but on a typical summer day, what the peak hour parking demand and the peak hour of the AM and PM peaks were. So I hope that clarifies. I can get into more detail if you want, or I think that kind of establishes our baseline conditions.
Thank you. Mr. Prescott, do you have other members of your team who wish to speak, or I'd like to have the board to have an opportunity to discuss what we heard last month and kind of catch up a little bit?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We don't have planned to have anybody else
Thank you.
present.
Just wanted to, I'd like to hear from board members. Wanted to start off with a couple of thoughts. Some of these were related in the minutes from the last meeting. The public hearing was continued to this evening. The takeaway from that was that the South County Hospital will continue to work with staff, that there would be a response to the planning board comments, and that potential for development of a draft motion. I know that one of the concerns that several board members have expressed is that although we have endeavored to work with the hospital and create the greatest amount of flexibility as far as the hospital is concerned, yet not eliminate any kind of regulatory oversight where appropriate on behalf of the town. It appeared to, I think, many board members that the town farm park was the basis or the foundation of the master plan that the hospital is looking to have approved. And that was concerning to many board members because it's a complex issue. It appears that there are many unknowns. The archaeology report, which we have not yet seen, was brought up at our last meeting. In addition, Mr. Revens has on several occasions, although he is not a traffic engineer, he has said that the hospital does not need parking, and when asked why the move to have the land swap, his response was so that he would have something in, or the hospital would have something in their back pocket. So all of these factors, I think, contributed to some confusion and concern for board members, particularly if there's any kind of implied consent with regard to the town park by an approval of the master plan as submitted, without any kind of a plan B. And I know that one of the questions that was asked of legal counsel at the last meeting was, does the board have the authority or ability to approve part of the institutional master plan? That, of course, is complicated because, again, the park is sort of the foundation of the current submission. But I'd like to hear from board members as far as what their concerns might be and how we can effectively move forward with this and give the board some degree of comfort as we move forward. Paul, your hand's on the mic, I see.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I had a note from the last meeting, and Mr. Prescott restated something similar tonight. I believe my note was something I'd written down after our planning director said it, and that is that whether or not there's a Plan B for parking, if Town Farm, for whatever reason, is not approved, the hospital has to come back with a revision to their institutional master plan, an amendment dealing with parking. was part of the issue, and I think part B is there is a parking maximum. The hospital is not able to add services if the parking isn't available. And I think in the draft memo that we saw this evening, or they can seek zoning relief. It seems to me that approval of the master plan in whole still leaves the town with a lot of room to review. Either they've got to come back with a revised master plan. If Town Farm conversion does go through and they want to put a parking lot there, that comes back to the planning board for review as a development. Is that correct?
Development plan review.
Development plan review. So depending on how you look at it, best case, worst case, the planning board still has a role here, whether it's revising the master plan or reviewing any proposal for a parking lot at Town Farm. Any approval of the master plan doesn't, we're not losing anything.
Yeah, and remember, the framework of development plan review, which, as I know you recall, because we changed the ordinance and spent many meetings discussing it, we ratcheted it down, if you will, from major land development project to development plan review. It's a permitted use, so the board is reviewing this IMP according to the criteria set forth in the IMP regulation of the zoning ordinance. But when and if the hospital moves forward with any development applications that are themselves considered a major land development project, that comes back before the board for independent review. In other words, if this IMP proposed a brand-new hospital building right next to the existing, campus, if the IMP said we're going to double the size of our existing hospital over the next 5 years, and the board were to approve that IMP document, that doesn't mean carte blanche, they can do it after they get a building permit. That's the purpose of the IMP regulation, is really to give the board and the community a heads up about what's to come. And it's really reviewing the document against the criteria that are set forth in the ordinance. So, as to continue on this, if the plan didn't address anything regarding parking, you would be well within your right to deny the application because the regulation says parking has to be addressed. So they've addressed parking in the document, and it's premised on the land swap. If the land swap doesn't occur, and that is the council's decision, they will need to come back before the board for approval of a revised IMP that has some other solution for parking.
And just to follow up on that, the idea that approving the master plan is somehow an endorsement of the Town Farm swap, I think that's in the hands of the council. The planning board has no role in that, and so our approval of the master plan, even though it mentions that, is not an approval on our part and shouldn't be taken as one.
Correct, because we can't speak for the council.
We have no role.
So I'd like to ask a question following that. Is this approval of this master plan similar to the approval of at master plan stage of a development, where we are essentially vesting a developer in the number of units he wants to build, and therefore we don't get to revisit, where if we approve the parking lot in that location, if we approve the idea of 145 parking spaces there, we don't get to change our mind on that later. This is an approval that, assuming the town council says yes, we're good, and now we just need to talk about landscaping and placement. Like that, we don't get to revisit even the premise once this is done. Like this is, you know what I'm saying? Like, are we vesting them in, as long as you get their approval, we'll work with you on the regulations, and we will not opine about whether or not it's a good idea.
Any parking lot expansion over a certain criteria triggers major land development project review. So that, as you know, has its own checklist, its own review criteria. So no, approval of the IMP doesn't make that ship sail or confer any vesting rights, because vesting is not a concept that comes into play under the framework of DPR.
I have a question.
Certainly.
So what are we approving if we approve the IMP? If this is just a heads up, we're just approving okay, we saw the document?
The zoning ordinance prescribes that that the IMP is reviewed under the framework of development plan review. Again, it's not advisory, it's a final decision which could be appealed to the zoning board if you deny the DPR. DPR is intended to be a relatively constrained review process. You'll note that the decision the draft motion doesn't include the findings that you would see for a land development project or subdivision, because those findings aren't required for development plan review. It's really, this is a permitted use, the planning board is reviewing the development plan, and it's a unique type of development plan because it's an institutional master plan. I really would say the main thrust of the whole regulation is, again, giving everyone, the board, the community, the town, a heads up on what is to come.
Other comments, questions?
I would also,
Go ahead.
I assume that approval of the master plan is rather advisory to the town council, that they're going to, like, why are we entertaining this conversation if it's not advisory, if it's not anything?
It's not advisory in that there is no relief required, either from the zoning board or any kind of zoning ordinance change or map change. There will be some action by the council required to, dot the i's and cross the t's on the land swap, and that, I think, will be action taken by most likely a future council. But no, it's not considered an advisory decision to the council on the question of should the land swap be approved, because there isn't a role for the planning board unless the council makes some kind of recommendation to refer that matter before you. You're reviewing the document and reviewing the contents and determining whether the submittal meets the criteria set forth in the regulation.
One of the things that we brought up at the last meeting, based on questions from both the board and the public, was that there are certain instances in which decisions to changes to the IMP would be reviewed by the administrative officer versus other types of changes would be reviewed by the planning board and thus the public. We had asked for some kind of, whether it's a table or chart or some means by which we could clarify that, which we have not yet received. And we did not receive this draft motion until yesterday via email. So I personally would like to see that information brought forward to the board and would like to be extremely clear on what we may or may not be approving.
So regarding a table, are you referring to a table that would clarify the text of the ordinance regarding modifications to an approved institutional master plan?
Modifications, and there are also criteria within that plan that are considered minor, some are considered major, so it was unclear, I think, to the board and the public which of those criteria would be, again, reviewed by the administrative officer versus the board as a whole.
There are 6 development actions that are listed in that subsection F, I think it's 603.2F, that are eligible for review, administrative review by the administrative officer.
Right.
So assuming the IMP is approved, the hospital comes back and says, we'd like to make some kind of change. The first category relates to certain interior renovations. The second category relates to certain facade renovations. The third category relates to a change of use to any allowed use within the hospital campus with stipulations on no increase in traffic or limited increase in traffic. The fourth category relates to bicycle parking facilities. The fifth category relates to EV charging stations. And the final category relates to open space, walking paths, outdoor seating, and landscape designs. So only, because the ordinance lists only those 6 categories as eligible for administrative review, in my opinion, any change to an approved IMP outside of those enumerated 6 categories would have to come back before the board.
And Amy, we actually expected a memo from staff on this. We know that some of these things are contained within this document, but again, that was something the board asked for. Other thoughts before we get to the
I
public?
just want to be clear. So basically, if besides any of those 6 things they do, they are coming before this board and maybe other boards to get permission.
Correct.
Okay, so there's lots of oversight.
Anything else, Susan?
I have another question. So last month when we met about this, we talked about whether or not we could parse out a portion of the master plan, approve all the other items, but not necessarily approve the portions that we were uncomfortable with. And I asked because the water's a little muddy around one of these portions, and there are meetings coming up and conversations going on all around us, and we're being asked to make a decision based on an ever-evolving conversation. And I wonder if we can approve the vast majority, which I think, I can't speak for anybody, I feel more comfortable with, or if we need, if it's an all or nothing.
I think to the extent you're going to partially approve the proposed IMP, the board would need to justify any, a denial of any aspect of the IMP. Just explain your decision and explain why it doesn't satisfy the regulation. And
Thank you.
They could choose to appeal that to the zoning board.
And I also add that this is a big project, and it really requires a strong plan, not a we'll see what happens. And I can see this town being under further pressure in the future because of what was approved and you moved forward with it and now isn't working, and so it's impracticable, and so we must have the town park. Because as things move forward, then, you know, pressure gets put on the town to accommodate the situation. With a plan this big, I'm just disappointed that we don't have more clarity on exactly what, it's supposed to be a heads up, and I don't feel like I'm getting a heads up. I feel like I don't quite know what's coming. And I would like to be privy to John Brown's discussion with you and the Rhode Island Historical Preservation's discussion. I feel like we're really out on the edge, and it really leaves me wondering how we serve our community properly when we have very little input into this big plan.
If I could just follow up on Robin's question, I think it's a good one. I guess the question is, does the planning board have a role in addition to HPHC and the town council in the archaeological resources? Is that?
Not based on my review of the IMP regulation.
No, thank you.
Anything else?
Is the parking lot potentially that we're talking about also in the scenic highway district as well? Would that be the scenic roadway board on that too? Another oversight?
So it would be in proximity to the Route 1 right-of-way. However, we don't have any current regulations in place that establish a buffer around the highway. So while it's presumed that it would be at some point in the future, currently right now it's not.
Other comments, questions? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Come up to the mic and state your name for the record, please.
Madam Chair, why members of the public are coming up again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. I would note for the record that we received 2 emails from Lynn Harper, and those emails dated October 24th and October 25th have been distributed to the planning board members.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. Everyone has those in front of them.
Good evening. My name's Elizabeth Scott. I live at on Hillcrest Road. I'm an abutting property owner to the hospital, and I've spoken before you a number of times, and also attended last night's town council meeting where discussion of communication from the Rhode Island Archaeological, I'm going to get it wrong, HPHC, was on the agenda and discussed at length, to the extent that it was added as an agenda item on their meeting last night. So I'm not sure quite where to start, other than to say that there's a lot of things in here that just don't make sense in terms of the timing. It's like the cart's before the horse. And I understand that you're under a time a period in which you need to make a decision on the master plan, and you're being asked to make a decision about addition of parking on land that the hospital doesn't own, and that the HBAC has, in their communication, has indicated they believe contains human remains and should be basically treated as a cemetery. So last time I checked, we're not paving cemeteries. And it just, there's so many, so just the whole timing of this, it seems like it puts you guys in a really awkward position. And it also, I mean, I think this is a really significant moment for the town as a whole. I don't attend many town council meetings, but I was really pleased to hear that there's a land acknowledgement statement at the beginning of our town council meeting, which acknowledges that basically these are, you know, Native American, Narragansett tribal lands in which we occupy. And to then, you know, kind of not take heed of advisory from the HPHC to afford it the respect and the respect that it should be given, not only as a burial site, but, you know, apparently there are artifacts there, and so it's a significant Narragansett tribal property. There's no question about that. So I guess I would make I would make the request that you do give partial approval of the master plan. I think there's many aspects of the master plan that are great, and certainly, you know I personally want to see the hospital thrive. I appreciate the outreach from David Fonts and others to really try to be good neighbors. And I think that there's some good communication that has been gone on, you know, that has occurred over the last, say, 6 months or so, that I think gives many of us hope that, you know, we can have a good relationship with the hospital. So I think that approving the IMP, if it's a heads up about what's to come, let's make sure that what's in there has some degree of certainty that it's actually going to be included. And certainly on the basis alone that South County Hospital doesn't own the property, and secondly, that the site, that HPHC is recommending that it be treated as a cemetery, would certainly seem to be sufficient basis to say it's not appropriate to include it in the institutional master plan at this time. I've gone back a number of times to look at the projected parking demand in the report, in the master plan, and that's on table 11 on page 26. And I know that there are days that the hospital doesn't have enough parking, but when you look through the numbers here, they currently have 821 spaces. They have a May peak demand of 701, and then that brings, when you look at the pre-COVID peak summer demand, so it's basically adding 10% to that May peak demand, they're up to 766. So they're still within their numbers currently. If you bring back the 80 of the employees who are currently relocated off campus, that brings them, there was a June increase of 877, so we're up to 788. If you add the 80 back in, we're at 868. So we're a little bit, no wait, that didn't quite work out, because I thought that we were actually under it. But I guess my point being is that there are 821 spaces. They add 40 from the demolition of the storage shed. That gets them to 861. And I thought actually when I went through these numbers that they still are within the amount of spaces that they have. They don't have a lot of extra spaces, but they have sufficient, except for those couple of days that there is very high demand in the summer. In some respects, I feel like these requirements are geared around the same thing that results in our shopping centers having these huge parking lots that are filled 1 or 2 days a year. And the rest of the time, they sit empty and create stormwater pollution problems and heat island and other impacts that residents have to deal with. So my request is that you give consideration to a partial approval. And I think there was one other point I wanted to make, but. Clearly the parking needs to be managed. If you go into a parking garage, it seems quite common now that there'll be the green lights that indicate where the available parking spots are. I mean, clearly you don't want people driving around the parking lot for, 10 or 15 minutes or however long it takes. So it just seems like the hospital, if they were able to incorporate more modern parking devices that help their patients and visitors to be able to find where the available lot places are, that would really help the situation, as well as other kinds of things that could be done to potentially give incentive for the employees to park off campus. And so in approving, if a partial approval were made, I would also request that you give approval to them to be exempt from the parking requirements in the zoning ordinance as well, because that's clearly what the parking analysis is intended to demonstrate, what their actual need is. And so if you do a partial approval that isn't recognizing that it has 144 slots from parking in the town farm and give them the exemption, then there's an understanding that they're on the margin of having enough parking. So, sorry, I'm babbling. Thank you. And thank you very much for all of your work.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
My name is Lynn Harper, and I understand you did get my emails. I live at 31 Kenyon Avenue, and over the past 27 years of living there, I've witnessed many of the expansions and of the hospital's growth, as well as the reductions in recreation space. I've also enjoyed the wonderful health care that they provide, so I am a proponent of them, and I do want to see them succeed as well. And I echo Ms. Scott's commentary on the land acknowledgement statement that we now have before our town council meetings, and I happened to notice the emblem above your heads. There's an arrowhead center to that, so obviously our Native American heritage is important to us. Most of my questions, I think, have been addressed by either their statements earlier. I just still am unclear and need clarification, and maybe it's my aging brain. I understand that they need to do an amendment to their IMP if the land swap doesn't occur. But if it does occur, and they now have that area for parking, as a couple of you have mentioned, it is a major portion of the development and requiring a lot of engineering work, drainage, obviously environmental concerns and archaeological concerns that may actually reduce the amount of land they can actually use or the configuration that they currently show on this IMP. And if it does go through, that will also increase their actual land area. And does that kick it into an actual formal public hearing? Because they would actually have other abutters that were never notified for this IMP. So that's I guess the clarification I'm looking for is a definitive answer on planning board, not just administrative staff review, and public review of that as well. Thank you.
Any land development project, and I believe a parking lot expansion of this magnitude would trigger land development project review, would require a butter notification for the subject property.
Thanks, Amy. Anyone else who wishes to speak?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Quinn, Hillcrest Road. Couple quick points. The first point is that there's a part of the parking lot that the hospital is presently using that is not theirs. That's never been unscrambled. There's two parcels. There's the proposed parking lot that is talking about the baseball field in the lower level, but there's a piece of the parking lot that's currently being used that's never been legally worked out. The hospital is using that. It's paved. It's somehow, I had a brief conversation with the town attorney after a meeting. Nobody could tell me exactly how that happened or why it happened, but a part of the park got eaten already by the parking lot. Two different pieces were chomped out of it. So now there's a proposal potentially to do that. It just, logically and legally, it doesn't really make any sense to me that you could approve something for development for a piece of property that the applicant doesn't have control over, at least presently. It may. So that part somebody needs to explain to me, because it just doesn't make any sense. And then I have no inside information or no knowledge of any kind of sale or buyout or whatever, but whatever does get approved needs to carry to any successor entity that may, merge or buy or acquire South County Health. Most of you know it's been part of the presentation that the hospital has made at various times that they're the only freestanding hospital that's not affiliated with a larger group and that's left in the state. That's to their credit, and sort of want to make sure that whatever is granted to them is, or whatever restrictions and grants are given to them, continue to follow whatever entity owns or operates the facility. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Amy, could you follow up a little on that? If another entity were to acquire this property, would the restrictions remain in force, or could someone then ask for a modification to those changes or the master plan?
Any applicant can ask for relief from any approval at any time. And as a general rule, land use approvals, like an IMP approval, are tied to the property and not to the status of the applicant.
So similar to a special use permit in a way. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Good evening. I'm Anitra Elmore, and I'm the COO, CNO of South County Health. Thank you for your time this evening. One thing that I think we all can agree on, that is, we have consensus that we do have an issue, and that is parking. We all agree. The short-term plan is not working. Historically, it has not been working. But I would urge you all to just think through, this IMP is so much more than parking. Our population, although it's not growing a lot, it's aging. And we have an aging population. We are desperately trying to ensure that we are able to provide the services and the care that this community deserves. Not without its challenges. Although I haven't been with the organization for 15, 20 years, and I understand from the neighbors and working with Dave that we haven't always gotten it right with communication and collaboration, that has changed, and I think you've heard evidence of that this afternoon. So I would ask that even though the numbers may say there is capacity, it's an average. And if it is you or me, and I'm coming to the hospital, and it's because I've gotten that call, and my loved one is on their deathbed, or my first grandchild is being born, I don't want to miss that opportunity looking for parking. This IMP is mission critical to ensure that we sustain this hospital and this healthcare system for 100 more years. Change is inevitable. The plan is just that, a plan. And whenever you make a decision to do something, you start with the plan. It is not implementation, it is a plan. We will be as transparent as we can be. We have revised the IMP several times based on the recommendations. We've tried to provide clarity, and we are absolutely respectful of the tribe, intentionally communicating with them. That is important to us. That aligns with our mission and values. So I know you're in a difficult position, but the time is critical as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hi, I'm Al Nordsey, 8 Broadmoor. A lot of times the websites are a little out of date, so sometimes my information is a little bit out of date. So I don't know if there's like a back and forth if I have a question about the planning board application before you. The one that I have from the website is to July 27th, 2022. And there's an owner authorization form, and I'm just wondering if how could they authorize their ownership over a piece of property that they don't own? I agree that I think this is a situation of the cart before the horse, with so many unknowns. They don't own the property. It never sat right with me that you would take a piece of property out of conservation. The language is pretty clear. It's supposed to be conserved in perpetuity. But then to find out that there's significant cultural resources attached to that piece of property, I mean, we should not be having a discussion about developing that property. I think if the town would swap that property, we should give the tribe the first option if they want or need that land back. But it's just, it was already mind-blowing to me that we would take a conserved park and develop it, and then now with the additional information, we really don't even know, because from what I understand, from what I heard last night, town council doesn't have the full picture, planning board might not have the full picture. These reports haven't been shared, and I do understand some of the reasoning. I mean, you don't want, people digging, which would essentially, sounds like be grave robbing. It should be protected. So I understand not disclosing maps and that kind of thing, but a lot more information needs to be included. I would check into whether or not there was an owner authorization form attached to this application for a piece of property that they don't own. It just doesn't sit right with me that we're talking about approving a plan for like a hypothetical piece of property that I don't agree with developing anyway. Conservation land is very important to balancing all the development going around. And I also would love to see what they come up with for stormwater if they're not going to be digging any trenches or anything like that. We had a pretty significant rain event a couple of weeks ago, and there was some water that came into the ER, of course, flowing downhill. I mean, I've looked at that land, it's pretty hard packed. You're going to have more of these rain events as climate change continues its march and we don't really do anything. And even approving more parking is like the opposite of the direction we want to go. We want to encourage public transportation, walking, not more cars, more pollution. And of course, as always, I have a personal concern about further pollution of our salt pond, which is so important to the local economy, especially with commercial fisheries, restaurants, recreation. So I would maybe consider striking the part about Town Farm Park, move forward with their master plan so that they can get everything with the building done. And then once we know who's going to own the land, if the town's going to keep it, because the council very well may decide to rescind the application for the conversion, which I think would, in light of the new information, probably be pretty prudent to do. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is anyone, can anyone answer the question that Ms. Norsey had relative to owner authorization form? Is that something that?
That form is standard for all zoning and planning applications, and the purpose of the form is to ensure that whoever is speaking at the meeting has the landowner's permission. Now, obviously, the hospital doesn't yet own town property, so they can't do anything with that property. That's understood by everyone. Did they need the town's permission to submit this application to you? No, they did not. They were required to submit an IMP to you under the new amended IMP regulation.
And Amy, how do you address the issue with the hospital currently using land that is town-owned property, as Mr. Quinn asked that?
Anything about that? I don't know anything about that.
Right.
Maria, if I could, Madam Chair.
Sure.
If I could offer just one thing, because it came up from 3 different members of the public that came up. I think it would be helpful to consider this review as we're approving a plan, and the plan like most conceptual master plans that this board reviews, automatically has assumptions associated with it, things that need to fall into place, whether it's stormwater permitting, whether it's revising the plans according to what DEM wants for wastewater, or pick any number of issues that could come up. This is not a permit. This allows the hospital to then proceed to the permit point once all the check boxes have been checked off. So it is not a de facto approval. It allows them to take the next step and say, okay, we need the rest of this to fall in line. How that falls in line, it's not going to be known tonight or in the near future. It has to play out in order to get to that point. So I think it's helpful when we look at, what are we actually approving? We're approving a plan in concept to allow for the application of a permit at a later point, if it gets to that point.
And Jay, if you were to make the analogy with regard to, I think it was Susan asked, how might this relate to, in a conceptual master plan approval, the vesting? There are those 6 areas which then, I believe Amy said, would be exempt from planning board review. So that, in essence, is similar to vesting in a way, because
Madam Chair,
we
if I
no
may.
longer have any purview over those areas. That is up to the administrative officer, those 6 criteria. And I think that's what prompted the board to ask at the last meeting, can we have a list of what we will not be able to weigh in on? Right, well.
And again, Madam Chair, if I just may expand on those 6 items, with regards to those, it doesn't give the administrative officer carte blanche for their approvals. There is a review of any regulatory requirement, so if they're expanding 5 parking spaces, which falls under the purview of the administrative officer's review, that administrative officer, who by the town's charter is the planning director, has a responsibility to review that proposal as it relates to the town's regulations, both zoning and your landscape provisions or buffering provisions, and make sure the hospital adheres to that. So it's not just, hey, there are 5 additional spaces, it falls under the 5%, we're just going to do it. It's a review of, they can potentially do it so long as they meet all of the pertinent regulations associated with those, in my example, 5 spaces. Just to expand on Jay's point, as a planning board member, this is a decision. If you choose to approve the IMP, it's not a motion to construct a parking lot on Town Farm Road. What you would be doing is acting on a document that contains a proposal to potentially utilize a portion of Town Farm property as a parking lot for the hospital's purposes. The very nature of the town's regulations associated with the IMP submission requirements requires them to provide you information regarding their future capital improvements. They can't do a capital improvement exterior that affects their parking or affects their campus that isn't in the IMP. And everyone keeps saying IMP. That's an institutional master plan. I'm used to acronyms. In order for the hospital to proceed with any construction of a parking lot, they would need to acquire the property. They would need to apply for and receive multiple approvals from not just the town, but other regulatory agencies at the state level and potentially other town boards and commissions, similar to a certificate of appropriateness that may be necessary from the Historic District Commission. If in fact there is a cemetery on the site, they still need approvals from the state on any stormwater management plan, and any approval for grading associated with their parking lot may need a multitude of approvals at the local, state, and potentially tribal level as it's associated with disturbance containing recommendations in the archaeological study. Again, the requirements of the IMP does not allow the hospital to entertain any construction projects without its inclusion in the IMP. If a project is not contemplated in the IMP, then they would need to amend their IMP, which is a process that comes back before you as a planning board. Again, approval does not give them a direct path to implementation.
Jamie, as an example, can we just look at landscaping? Does it mean that any and all landscaping would be outside the purview of the planning board and the public? Clearly, it's well understood that that has a major impact on almost every plan that comes before us. We all have talked for many years now about the need for revision of those landscape regulations. They're quite out of date. And using that as an example, I would be concerned, and again, not personally for you, but one single person, administrative officer, making those decisions rather than the board as a whole, who have seen both good and bad examples of landscaping and buffering that does or does not work. And in the past, the hospital has, as they've gone forward with various projects, the landscaping has often been relegated beyond the point of the improvement or the project, or not completed at all. So again, I think it's worth bringing up.
Yeah. Madam Chair, again, a wonderful point that you're making, and it's associated with that potential provision of alternative landscaping designs. My interpretation as the standing administrative officer is that any landscaping required associated with an expansion project that goes through your DPR process gives you the full ability as a board to review the landscaping. My interpretation of this section is if the hospital was contemplating a landscaping plan of their campus outside of the regulatory review process associated with a buffer or other provisions on the regulatory side, that they could submit that landscape plan to the administrative officer for review. So if they were adding 40 street trees to their proposal that weren't part of a expansion plan, that they would run that landscaping plan by the AO for approval and for review and approval. But if there was a landscaping plan associated with 40 additional parking spaces that didn't attribute them to an exemption of full DPR review, they can't go to the planning board and say, here's our plan for the parking, but you do not get to look at landscaping because landscape's exempt. My interpretation of this section is landscaping associated with any regulatory review of an application before the planning board, you have the full purview and effect of your regulations. It's things outside of the normal permitting process where they want to install, a new flagpole with landscaping. This allows them to go to the AO for that, because that's not a regulatory permitted activity under development plan review. So to me, it's very small things. And again, I understand, I'm speaking to you as the seated AO now, and I've been a planner for 34 years, so I understand not everyone has the same aptitude associated with being conservative and looking out for the best interests of the community as well as the planning board. So I understand your concern, but from my interpretation of the regs, there are very few projects in between that I would feel comfortable as the AO exempting them. Anything associated with any project coming before you does not exempt from them from the landscape code.
So it's that delineation between internal changes versus expansion, and I think that's where the gray area could be considered.
And Maria, just to add, sorry, Madam Chair, just to add, I remember that the landscaping requirements are codified. So if a project presents to the AO and it's non-compliant, it should be an automatic back to the planning board if it's non-compliant. Now, if it presents and it's compliant, that's where, there's other factors that come into play, but it's...
Well, yeah, that is, it should or will come back to the board. That's...
And I think there's inherent flexibility in that. I don't think there's any, I mean, I guess we could write it into the regulations and make it extremely strict, but I think that may backfire on some of the smaller projects where it would add to agendas. And for
right,
minor...
Obviously a flagpole or something
Right.
minor,
Right. And I think they would in any municipality, the way the regs are written, there would need to be a level of trust that the AO understands where the planning board is on these type of things and their tolerance for it, and therefore their tolerance for an administrative review might be different.
Right, and once this is passed, it can't necessarily be changed other than an updated plan that might come 5 years into the future?
Correct. So again, back to my prior statements, if you were to entertain approval of the IMP, the projects listed in that IMP are the projects they can contemplate over the next 5 years without having to come back to you for an amendment to their IMP. An example would be, if they propose to do a new helipad on their campus, that is not contemplated in their institutional master plan. That would require an amendment to the institutional master plan prior to their ability to seek any permit at the local, state, or federal level for a new helipad. And I think that's probably the extreme example of that, but all of those things that are associated with potential disturbances to the neighborhood that aren't contemplated in there have to come back to you. If they propose to do something vertical associated with their park lot, it's not contemplated in the IMP, would require them to come back and seek an amendment to include it in the IMP before they could move to construction and permitting, which would lead to construction.
Thanks, Jamie. If there was no one else, please come up to the podium.
Hello, good evening. I'll be brief. My name is Nadine McCauley, and I live at 195 Kenyon Avenue. I've lived there for 20 years. I also am the patient experience director over at the hospital. I've worked there for 10 years. I oversee the complaints and the grievances, the volunteers, and I'm the patient advocate for the hospital. I'm not an expert, and I've never spoken at one of these meetings. I'm certainly not an expert on all the documents you're talking about, but I am an expert on our patients and what they're asking for and what they're requesting. And I just ask that you consider our patients' access to our facility, because they are requesting more access and do have issues on an ongoing basis that we are doing our best to help with. So, for your consideration, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wishes to speak? Thoughts from board members? Paul, would you like to start? Just kind of summarize where you're at and what you think our options may or could be.
I think it's obvious there are a lot of issues around Town Farm that we're not going to resolve as a planning board. I guess my understanding of this is that we're approving a plan that may need to be revised if and when either the town council or the National Park Service or HPHC say that, one, the swap's not going to happen, or yeah, the swap can happen, but then HPHC comes back and says you can't put a parking lot there. I don't know if they have that authority. But again, we're not being asked to approve that. We're being asked to approve a plan that will require modification if and when those things happen. I'm not comfortable with the idea of voting on part of the plan. I think it feels like an all or nothing approval. I feel comfortable with the administrative officer having that limited authority that the OL will have. I think there is that question of when you have a different person in that role, does the planning board scream and the town manager intervenes? I don't know how that works. I'm not sure I want to find out. That's all I have.
Thanks. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the way I look at this is there's layers of oversight after this, which makes me feel more comfortable that we're not approving really any action. We're just approving a plan that may or may not happen. That has to get oversight from more and more people. I do think I can't see them wanting to add more parking that isn't needed. Every time I go to the hospital, which is more than I'd like, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old and 70 construction workers, so I feel like I'm there all the time. I can never find a parking spot. So to me, it is a concern or an issue. I think we have to look at the community as a whole and not just the abutting property members, and look at the benefit that the hospital brings. I think of like 3 attributes to this community: the hospital, URI, and the environment or the area that we live in. And I think they work well together. So I would be in favor of this, and I agree. I think it's either all or nothing.
Thanks. Robin?
I certainly agree that the hospital is important to a community. I also obviously can see that a lot of the parking spaces there are consumed by Ortho Rhode Island people who are not there to deliver a baby in their local hospital or get emergency care. In fact, oftentimes we are sent to Rhode Island Hospital to get the care that we need. And so if parking is that big of an issue, the hospital might consider taking some of that Ortho Rhode Island office space out of there and free up some of the parking spots for the people who might be dying in a hospital bed. That should be maybe part of your considerations. Thanks.
We've heard so much about parking. I mean, on the one hand, we keep saying it's not the crux of the whole problem, but it sounds like it is. I mean, we've all been in situations, not just at this hospital, but other hospitals, where you're upset, you're in a hurry, you're flustered, and you're driving around. So parking is really critical, especially if we're going to be approving the IMP as it is. One question I have, it was mentioned about off-site parking, and many hospitals do use off-site parking, particularly if we can identify peak areas. I don't get the sense that off-site parking has been really explored. I mean, we have 2 parking options on the table: town farmland and the shed, and maybe Ortho, Rhode Island. But I think we need to push a little bit more and see if there are some other options out there. They might not be ideal, but the situation we have right now is not ideal. So I would encourage that. Maybe look at remote parking as an option. Thank you.
And what's your feeling on the institutional master plan, the draft that we have before us as a whole?
I would not have a problem as long as we've got qualifications in place and restrictions in place to approve it. But I don't think it makes sense to approve just a part of it. I think there are too many intertwined pieces, and I think down the road we could be really having some major issues if we did that.
Thank you. Joe?
I think I'd be hard-pressed to think of a organization, public or private, that is more important or more integral to the community. I think that also could be said for our various groups of emergency responders. And given the important role that they play in the community and how they serve the community's needs, when they come in front of us for a project, development project, the weight of my deliberations is not necessarily on approval or disapproval. It's more on how do we approve and give them the flexibility they need while understanding the impacts and mitigating those impacts to the neighboring property owners. It seems that the institutional master plan has 2 pieces. One is to give us a snapshot of what their future thoughts are. And on those particular development projects, it would still come in front of the board. And our best opportunity to understand what those impacts would be at that time, when they have detailed designs and detailed plans. And that would still happen. And the neighbors would still have the opportunity to express their concerns then. The other piece of the IMP is to give them flexibility and a streamlined process for approval of a certain category of projects, those 6 items. We had deliberation before, and those items or those categories were specifically picked out as things that would be very benign and very, very unlikely to have impacts to the neighbors. That was our deliberation at the time. And because they had very little impact to the neighbors, we felt the flexibility, given the flexibility, would be beneficial, and that flexibility was to be by the administrative officer. So my overall thought is to approve the IMP as it is.
Thanks, Joe. Susan?
So I have a few thoughts here. One thing that we haven't talked about tonight was something that happened last night at the town council meeting, where the town council invited the planning board to a joint work session in November between the town council, the planning board, the town manager, the Narragansett tribe, maybe HPHC, to really understand all of the different moving parts of this. And I'm not really understanding, if we were to make a decision on this tonight, why we would potentially be invited to a meeting a month away with the town council. And so I guess, for me, if there is more information that we need to have to make a decision, and if it does warrant a meeting with the town council, it seems a little silly to make a decision and then have a meeting to understand all the facts of this a month away. Unless I'm misunderstanding the purpose of the November meeting, I think it's to get to the bottom of all of these muddy parts. So I guess I'd like some clarification on if we've washed our hands of any responsibility for choosing to approve this project or not, why we'll even talk to these people a month from now. So I'd like to understand how that plays in. And I understand what has been told to us tonight about what we're approving, and that, there's a lot more steps to approval. But I also believe that our town council puts a lot of weight into what the planning board says. They have sent things back to us for our opinion. I've heard them say before, we have this in front of us, the planning board has approved it, let's talk about this. I think we are giving, if not intentionally, we're giving our blessing to the entirety of this project if we do approve it in its whole. Like, there is some implied approval that we approve the concept if we approve this project. And so for that reason, I would be more comfortable approving the portions of it which I feel comfortable with, as opposed to the entire project. And so I also am looking at the findings of fact in our motion. And the first finding of fact is that the institutional master plan is consistent with the comprehensive community plan. So I opened up the comprehensive community plan today, and the section of cultural and historic resources, policy 1.2 says, continue to expand the town's inventory of historic buildings and structures, and B, historic and prehistoric archaeological sites, ensuring that all aspects and periods of South Kingstown's history are identified and preserved where appropriate. And then on the same page under the action plan, it says, I'll read the whole thing because it's easier. Revise the subdivision and land development regulations to require that applications be reviewed in consultation with a professional archaeologist or historic preservation specialist when historic and/or prehistoric resources are located on site. Such specialist will be hired by the town, funded by the applicant, and shall develop an alternative plan or appropriate mitigative action. And so if we're following our comprehensive plan, we're not addressing any of the things in our cultural and historic resources portion regarding this potential archaeological site. So I am looking at our own comprehensive plan for some guidance on how to manage this. And I think that's all I have for comments right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So I do agree with the idea that we have had from the beginning of this process, that we want to create a greater degree of flexibility for the hospital. But I also understand and agree with many of Susan's points with regard to consistency with the comprehensive plan, impacts, and implied consent that may be a part of any approval. This is a very short motion, and I am wondering if there is a way to elaborate in the conditions, the concerns that the board has moving forward, one of which would be the cultural and historic resources that have not yet been adequately explored, the fact that the board has not been privy to the report from HPHC, other implications that may be important to consider should the park project go forward. It just seems to me that it would be smart for the board to state some of these concerns, whether they're within findings or within conditions, if we are to move forward with this draft. Jamie, oh, go ahead.
Is it possible to put your concerns in a condition of approval?
That's what I was getting at, yes.
Are we going to wait until we do meet with town council?
Well, I guess that's another question that somebody here should be able to answer with regard to the discussion about a joint work session, which I, don't know enough about it to understand how that would all work.
Madam Chair, I just want to add that the review period for the board to make a decision, the deadline is October 30th.
Understood.
I wasn't at the council meeting, and I'm not sure whether the council, whether the request for a meeting, a joint session, was in the form of a suggestion or a direction. I'm just not sure.
Jamie?
In an attempt to recall last night's discussion late in the evening, the town council discussed having a potential work session with the planning board and others. And I did make mention to the fact that you have a live application before you. And there was discussion of the council of having that meeting sooner than later.
Mhm.
And they actually pushed back their intended date, conscientious of the fact that you have an application before you with regulatory timeframes associated with it. So again, I don't want to imply what their intent was with that, but they did push that meeting out to a future date rather than earlier in November to allow you to proceed with this permitting process.
So
Again,
that would,
Mr. Manning was also there, so he is de facto member. But I think that summarizes what some of the discussion was.
it would just be helpful to know what the intent was with, given the fact that they do understand that, or hopefully understand that we have a time frame unless there is an extension of some sort by which we have to make a decision, and how the work session would impact any future decisions that they might have. Yes, of course.
I've had knee surgery, so that's why I'm limping. Thank you for what you do there. I was at the meeting last night, and I think the intention is the town council is looking on November 28th to have all the entities involved on the staff level and just get together and put everyone on the same wavelength is exactly where this project stands. I do not think the intent was to postpone any type of action by the planning board tonight or in the near future. It's just to get all the council members, and that will be a new council that will be there with at least 2 new members to bring them all up to date on this very important issue that the town is facing right now. So once again, I do not think the intent was to postpone any action you wish to take tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So back to potential for additional conditions. Susan, you had brought up the comprehensive plan and the cultural and historic resources section. Is there something specific that you think would be helpful to add to this to give us a greater degree of comfort and knowledge going forward with regard to how that might evolve?
So that would be a motion that you're writing to approve the document in its entirety? That's where we're working from here?
Well, it seems that the majority of the board is leaning in that direction, so in order to try to make this as palatable and positive as possible for the board as a whole, my suggestion is to say, are there conditions that could be added that would improve this approval process? And I'm only picking on you because you brought up the...
At the list of, all right, so at the risk of sounding a little obnoxious, I would put in a note saying the board recognizes that this master plan is not consistent with our comprehensive plan. But I know that that's obnoxious for me to say. But I don't feel like some portions of this are consistent. So I don't know how to make that a motion. I mean, I don't know how to add that in as a condition that...
Well, often you'll see language in an approval that says the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan with all the required conditions for approval. And so you could technically add a condition that would then help to mitigate that lack of compliance with the comprehensive plan.
So could I say the institutional master plan is inconsistent with the comprehensive community plan section, blah, 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 and then include this information?
I don't think that would really achieve the purpose.
Okay.
I think, I mean, that's something you'd say if you were going to issue a denial.
Yes.
If you are going to, and if that's where you're at, then that's fine. But if there's a way to make this more compliant with the comprehensive plan by adding a condition with regard to the cultural and historic resources, this is the opportunity.
I mean, is it possible, so I don't think it's inconsistent, but is it possible that you say that it impacts areas of the comprehensive plan and would need to address, and then you could accept some of these cultural and historic resources, their final detailed plans need to address that in an acceptable manner or something like that?
Is that, Susan, is that strong enough? I mean, I think that's helpful.
Can I jump in? Maybe
Sure.
Amy or Jamie can help me, but I'm thinking, something to the effect that development of a parking lot will satisfy HPHC and tribal community. That, I mean, I think those elements of review are going to be there anyway, but just, does that make sense? Amy's looking at me puzzled, so I'm not sure I'm
you're
making
saying
sense.
potential development of a parking lot should the park project move forward must satisfy the concerns of HPHC.
Yeah.
Be consistent with the
Madam Chair, if you can continue to discuss as we're taking notes, then potentially in a few moments take a 5-minute recess, and we can, I already have 2 or 3 sentences put together that may not necessarily satisfy everyone, but may give more members a comfort level with the motion you're contemplating.
I think what I'm trying to get at is that the town isn't relying on HPHC or a Graham Pape study, that we are doing everything we can to investigate and protect archaeological resources, and that any development would proceed in a way that does no damage.
Again, I'll just read the link. I'm typing as I'm listening and trying to understand what the points are and how to address them in language, and working on language. Any final development of the town farm property should consider the goals of the comprehensive plan as it relates to protecting, and to that point, any other recommendations from regulatory agencies who are charged with the oversight of, in essence, those antiquities.
You've been doing this for a while.
But if you give me a few more moments, I could probably do a little better than that.
Another one that was based on comments from the public and from others, and it's related to parking. I don't know the best way to articulate this, but I think it would be worthwhile somewhere in this document to consider or to ask the hospital to consider alternate means of parking compliance and enhancements thereof, such as, I'm not even going to use the word parking garage, but I know that there are elevated parking decks, and in fact, there's one at University Orthopedics on Route 2, and also either mechanical or electronic means to enhance parking, whether it's something such as Liz suggested, or an app that's developed to allow patients to figure out quickly, because we can do it with GPS, where there might be spaces open, but something of that nature, just to, again, demonstrate that we are concerned with the parking situation in general, and the fact that more pavement, as has been addressed this evening, leads to more issues with water quality, stormwater, and so on. And I would also, to that end, also add a suggestion with regard to any additional parking or pavement that should utilize low-impact design and green infrastructure in the design of any additional parking. That's something that this board has promoted in every project that we look at, and I think stating that, even though some may think that's obvious, is just a good idea. Any other thoughts? Nothing? Well, let's take a 5-minute break, and board members can ruminate a little more in those 5 minutes as well.
Jamie, do you want this?
Right. Right. And makes you feel like you don't matter. Oh, we should be provided with that information. Here we are at 10 o'clock at night, right? Being forced to proceed. Right. Until later. Why will I even bother going to that meeting? Right. Was ridiculous. Yeah. Plus, they can lower their parking requirement by getting off the Rhode Island. By getting off the Rhode Island. I was in that parking lot this week trying to find a parking spot. Just sit with this for 10 minutes, just to wiggle my knee and see how things are going. Half the day. If not a problem, put some of that business somewhere else. Yeah, the two bathrooms. You want to put the ladies outside? Come on. Right.
Bring the lady outside? I mean, they're not addressing the part.
No, but they're hoping that as it proceeds forward, then it becomes inevitable. Because what else are they going to do? That's the problem.
And the thing is,
The if-then-go-to kind of thing, you know?
I mean, he mentioned COVID.
Yeah.
We're not going back to COVID.
Right.
Joe, I didn't even recognize you earlier. How you doing?
I'm
Good?
doing
How's your
well.
boys doing?
Great,
Hey,
great.
the military
What's Adam
lady-
up to?
What's that?
What's Adam?
So Adam graduated in mechanical engineering from URI.
Excellent.
And then decided that he didn't want to do engineering, he wanted to do computer administration. So he's working at a place called Novartis up in Cambridge, and he's doing computer stuff there for them.
Good.
So that's good, yeah.
Where-
So he likes that.
Does he live in Boston proper or Brookline? Or
He was in Brookline. for the summer. He was just renting a room because he had just moved up there. And then in September, he moved to a neighboring community right there with a couple of his friends. They got a whole apartment, so. Yeah, right
That's
there.
the only way to do it if you're up there.
Yeah, and then my younger son, Lucas, he's in his junior year of mechanical engineering at URI. Great, so.
Did they live on campus?
No, we have a bunch of rental property,
Oh, that's
so they
right,
lived
that's
they
right.
lived in
There
a
you
rental
go.
property nearby.
So, they were the eyes and ears. Did they meet the 80%?
They were good. They were good. Anyways, a good.
How long have you been doing this?
You've been doing this a long time, because I remember you telling me about this back in Scouts. Yeah, maybe when you just got
Thank you for your
started.
service.
I think it's good.
No, it's. No, that's controversy.
Yeah, you sure do.
I think people, the heart's in the right place. Maybe we make some wrong decisions, but the heart's in the right place.
I mean, we have to be good neighbors.
You guys are volunteers, right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
well, essentially, they give us like $20 a month or something.
That pays for the coffee. Or the milk of
I
magnesia.
don't know if that pays for your gas to get here. All right, we'll see you there.
Life expectancy.
And the psychological distance gets pretty far. I'd be surprising to me. Okay.
Yeah, right. Never. I mean, and I think you're using it nice for it. So that's my granddaughter Gloria.
Why don't they know that? Are they just saying now with the planning board we're doing that?
But I think Jamie just said that he informed them about our deadline. Right. And they pushed it further up. Maybe they don't want to get involved with elections.
I think it's intentional. It's.
They're more political. And I don't think they should be deciding it all. our big give back is, but you can put conditions on it for, yeah.
My rate's good. Yes.
I guess I'm not sure what happens with the deadline.
I mean,
Right.
You tell me 260.
Yeah, that's what she's saying. What if
yeah,
we do
we
that?
would not approve, we deny
I
it.
was thinking that's the way it's gonna go.
If, you look around a room, I have it.
Opening a loophole. And this is, and because pursuant to our plan,
Yeah, no, if you could get statewide planning back.
Digging indications that something
Sure, you'll
you would think they are.
pick out a couple of nice juicy ones.
That's not good.
So,
not even necessarily things, just the way the ground.
you have to have statewide planning.
No.
Right, it could be interesting.
Oh, yeah, right. It was based on commercial. Yeah, yeah, that is. That's fantastic.
Cause that problem that I do now.
Yeah, that's, no, you're 100%. You're 100%. The other thing is, when they throw backstop, dugout,
You won't jump in the van and get in.
Guys, we're just going to give Jamie a few more minutes. He's still typing, so rather
Okay.
than start the meeting and sitting in silence while he types, we will give him
That's fine.
time to finish up.
I would guess.
I think that while we wait for Jamie to finalize the suggestions for the motion in terms of conditions, perhaps someone would like to make a motion to close the public hearing? Yes?
I just want to make.
Just restate your name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, Patrick Quinn, Hillcrest Road. I just want to make an observation and ask you to consider that. If you approved the master plan for a piece of property that the hospital does not own, you are granting momentum to the land swap. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak while we're waiting? If there are none, would Peter restate your motion to close the public hearing? Is there a second? Second from Joe. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. That's all right. While we're waiting for Jamie, I have a question for Amy based on the last comment from the public. Would it be helpful or appropriate to ask for, in the conditions, a clarification of the current and future use and ownership of the property, so that somewhere it's delineated that this is current, like when someone puts a shed on, you know.
Can certainly include as a finding and condition that approval of the land swap shall be subject to council approval, and whatever other approvals, you know, federal, state approvals may be required. Whether or not it's perceived as giving momentum to the land swap, I think that's beyond the control of this board.
That's why I came up with through this process, there should be a clarification of the current and future use and ownership of the associated property.
So I have a question for someone. Is there any room in this document that this property, if it were swapped, could be used for any purpose other than 142 parking lot? Is there any wiggle room in this document that it could become something else that we're not intending?
I mean, you're approving the IMP, which includes, here's what we plan to do.
Right.
So I don't think there is wiggle room on using it as something else. You're approving the IMP based on the acquisition of the town farm site for parking.
So if this document says 142 parking spaces, and upon a further hearing, we feel more comfortable with 50 parking spaces, are we locked into 142 parking spaces because that's what's in this plan? Or do we have the discretion to say a big portion of this park really isn't appropriate, or you've not shown you need 142, whatever a rationale is, can we pull back some of this size and scale?
When and if and when the parking lot comes before this board, it would come under the framework of development plan review. And it would need to satisfy the criteria set forth in the ordinance and the regulations for development plan review. So I think the board would have the discretion to dial back the parking spaces only to the extent that that DPR application didn't satisfy those criteria.
And does the council, as part of any approval process that might occur in this negotiation, have the ability to also either dial it back or make modifications or requirements as part of the agreement that they may or may not make.
I think that would be subject to negotiation between the town and the hospital.
So that does exist. And Jamie, you are going to add that if the land swap does occur, that will come back to the planning board, even though we all understand that that's the case.
Yes. So, Madam Chair, I do have some proposed amended language. And again, this may need to be slightly wordsmithed. So, in the draft motion that you have, there is a draft motion for consideration. It starts with a motion to approve. That's the first paragraph. And there's a motion that starts with quotation. As part of the submission, the South County Hospital has recognized in writing. At the end of that paragraph, I would recommend adding, in addition to the above, the planning board recognizes that significant cultural resources may be situated on the site that could affect the extent and amount of development that can occur on the town farm parcel. It is further noted that the future development of the town farm property shall consider the goals and objectives contained in the town's 2021 Comprehensive Community Plan as it relates to integrating development with the objective to preserve the town's unique cultural and historic resources while recognizing that a multitude of outside agencies may have regulatory authority over the disposition of those resources.
Are you under findings or conditions?
I'm under your general motion to approve.
Oh, I worry that unless it's under findings or conditions, it doesn't have enough authority.
We could make that a finding.
Why couldn't it be a condition?
Hearing that and thinking about it just now, as we all did, to me, it sounds more like a finding. A condition to me is an obligation. A finding is, we're finding that something is true. It is true that other agencies will have regulatory authority over the land swap. You know, to the extent we're talking about future development shall consider the comprehensive plan, I'm not sure that has any meaning if it were construed as a condition, because I'm not really sure what it means. I think it has some meaning if it's viewed as a finding.
So
I just want to make sure that nothing is watered down based on where it might occur in this motion.
Okay. Point taken. With regards to conditions, staff had two original, one relating to landscape architecture and the other with regards to lighting consultants. We would recommend, based on the discussion, a third and fourth. The third being, the hospital, as part of any application for approval for additional parking, shall also include all parking alternative parking compliance options, such as electronic parking management features. The IMP already contemplates off-site parking, shuttling, valeting, and other alternatives, but I think the thing that was brought up, I believe Ms. Mack brought it up, was, you know, some type of feature, and you'll see those in parking garages, will tell you how many spaces are available and where those spaces are available, and that's something that could be instituted on property. Item number 4, if the transfer of the town farm parcel occurs, the hospital shall meet with the planning board to discuss the timeframes for development and provide preliminary development plans for said property. I don't know if you want a time frame on that, whether it be, you know, within 6 months of that potential transfer. If the transfer of the town farm parcel occurs, the hospital shall meet with the planning board to discuss the timeframes for development and provide preliminary development plans for said property. Again, within 6 months.
That really relates to the time frame. It doesn't necessarily state that they will undergo development plan review for that portion.
They're required to go under development plan review. So this is a step. I think what I heard from the discussion is before they go full board with development plan review, that they take an intermediate step, come before the board, have a discussion with you that we've acquired this, here's our intention to build it out, here's what we're now proposing to do, here's the information associated with cultural resources. There are a number of checks and balances that have to occur, and basically having that discussion with you about those checks and balances, and they may have further information associated with those cultural resources and the implication and protection of those that they don't have today because they're not that far along in their development plans.
And in the previous number 3, you did not mention consideration of an elevated parking deck or some other alternative.
If they contemplated an elevated parking deck, that would have to come back to you as an amendment to the institutional master plan.
Right, but again, it's there as a suggestion for mitigation of the parking problem.
We can say,
'Cause it's a consider.
shall also include and not be limited to alternative parking compliance option. Or a parking deck. I can read any of those back, and again,
You didn't do the one about the stormwater and green infrastructure.
I have language just buried below. There we go. What I would recommend is, Madam Chair, under item number 4, when they come back to you in that 6-month time frame, that they also bring to you an evaluation of alternatives associated with innovative stormwater management.
I think that should be part and parcel of their IMP as a whole, not just if they come back with regard to the park. You know, I'm trying to make sure that that is something that is utilized throughout the site, whether it's minor or major change, expansion, or what have you.
So are you recommending that within a certain time frame they come back to amend their IMP to make a statement associated with?
Well, I think we just want to make sure that that is part of the design process and that that is front and center. I mean, look at all the problems that we have had with stormwater just in subdivisions.
If you give
This
me
is
a moment.
something of in a much larger scale. So I think making that statement with regard to water quality and stormwater management and utilizing LID and green infrastructure is an important statement to make.
Yeah, I'm working on 5.
And I think that might need to be qualified as to whether or not it's required. I mean, there may be improvements that are undertaken where stormwater improvements are not
Right.
required.
Of course, when.
But I don't want to be in a situation where you end up forcing somebody into a stormwater improvement when it's not triggered. But I understand where you're coming from. I just want to make sure it's articulated that way.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't say that, then we have a problem.
I think I'm getting a sense of where the board or where I think we might be going, but I just want to clarify. We're going to end tonight with direction to staff, and the board's not going to take a vote until we have a further opportunity to review this draft?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. I just wanted to.
Yeah, it's very hard to, yeah. So we'll have to schedule that.
So I think now it might be an appropriate time, or at some point before we end tonight, to ask the applicant for a brief extension to the deadline that I think expires on the 30th.
Because you finally have us all kind of on the same page in your favor, so.
Right, so I really super reluctant to allow this moment to pass. You know, this is our second public hearing, technical review, we've been through a lot of.
We closed the public hearing, remember?
Excuse me?
We've closed the public hearing.
Yeah, no, I know, but we've had 2 nights of public hearing and a lot of discussion on this. So I thought the way we were, contrary to Amy, I thought where we were heading was we were drafting a motion that we're now going to vote on. So do we really need to put this off?
This is important
Oh,
for you
believe me.
folks and us, and we want to make sure that we completely understand the language and that, you know, we have to feel comfortable as it moves forward. So I think that while we appreciate Jamie's wordsmithing, I think, as Amy suggested, we need to see it in front of us and be able to say, okay, or you need to change a word or something.
So let me-
Again, that wouldn't be a public hearing, that would just be before the board. It could be at a work session.
Yeah, so that's where I was going to go. When is that? When would that be happening?
I think from staff and legal's perspective, our next available date would be November 10th. It's a Thursday.
Yeah, at this hour of the night, my sort of mental calendar is,
That'd be a special meeting.
You got a group of people behind me that are going to kill me if I say yes.
I don't see
to
too many
this.
red faces, but I understand where you're coming from. Do people know if you're available on the 10th, which is a Thursday, yes? Anyone else know, one way or another?
That would be the second Thursday of the month of November.
That's the one already on our calendar.
No. We moved it to the 15th.
And of course, it would be sent to the board well in advance. Jamie had just said during our break that legal counsel is not available on the date that we had rescheduled our November meeting to. So we're not doing that one? I'll let.
So just for clarity, because of the election on November 8th, the work session was moved to the 15th.
Yep.
So I think there was some sentiment this evening that the planning board members would like to keep their work session as clean as possible and potentially not add another potential motion for review. So again, also, council is not available on the 15th, so our
So would this
intent would
be
be
a
to
special
hold the
meeting,
work
or
session
would it
and
be
a special meeting.
work session? Because
We could
none
do
of us
one
want to see the work
we could do
session
one or
hijacked,
two
of
things.
course.
We could move your 15th meeting to the 10th and add the motions to that discussion, or have a special meeting on the 10th for the sole purpose of discussion of motion for potential action on the hospital's institutional master plan, and then maintain your meeting work session.
Well, it seems a bit silly to have one small item on an agenda and not discuss all the other work that we have to do if we do something on the 10th. Does everyone feel that way? If we're going to be here, we might as well be productive.
I'm okay with that. No, I think what Maria's suggesting is move the meeting from the 5th, move the work
Yes,
session.
we'll still have two
Yeah,
meetings.
move. 22nd.
Is our normal.
And why not just keep the meeting on the 15th as we know?
I just want to be clear, it's not just that I'm not available, no one from our office is available, and I don't want to leave the board without legal counsel.
So hopefully, we have a majority of folks that can make it.
So my last language that I've been asked to put together, and again, we will, council and I will further discuss this and clarify the language. The hospital shall incorporate appropriate stormwater quality management technology that is appropriate for any proposed improvements that require their installation. And again, we'll may add a few adjectives and adverbs in the
Okay.
more appropriate
Yeah,
places.
yeah, you can, when you have. Is there anything else that we are missing?
So can I ask another question?
Yes.
Is there language in here that I don't see that is there language in here that I don't see that makes it very clear that all of these conditions, findings, and approvals carry on if this hospital is sold or transferred to a different party? Like, is it clear?
It's my understanding that's a matter of law.
Correct.
That approvals run with property.
Okay. So it
Although
doesn't need to be
anything is
stated.
appealable, as she also stated.
So it doesn't need to be specially put on here?
We don't need to start including in standard language that the approval runs with the land, because that is standard for all land use approvals.
So I have another question. One of the members of the public got up and spoke earlier and said, at this same time, why don't we talk about asking for an exemption from the South Kingstown zoning ordinance that has the parking requirement? Is that which is part of the crux of the parking shortage, if I understand this correctly. Can that be talked
I
about?
think the whole idea of the IMP is that it does relieve the hospital from the burden of the traditional zoning ordinance requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, the IMP includes a provision for alternate parking proposal analysis that allows them a reduction of up to 30% of the required parking per zoning.
Okay, automatically, it's just built in.
It's an allowance in the regs that says that they, in their plan, if they so choose, they could explain how they would be able to satisfy the alternative parking scenario using different methods rather than relying on the strict number listed in the zoning ordinance.
Excellent, thank you.
Anything else? All right, Jamie, we will look forward to you sending this on to us. We are now scheduled for the...
If I may, I don't think we've fully resolved from our perspective
Okay.
the issue of the continuance. So I think there was some informal polling of the board that went on a minute ago and discussion about it, a couple of different meetings. Did we get an
The
answer
10th.
that everyone's
Yes.
available?
Or enough.
For the 10th?
On the 10th, I think all but one.
Okay. I ask only because we recently had a meeting where we barely had a quorum, and I just want to make sure that this group is able to attend.
Well, because of laws passed in the General Assembly this session, quorums are irrelevant, so to speak, for planning boards now anyway, unfortunately, so. Yeah, after January, but still.
So the
yeah.
agreement would be to allow for an extension through that date, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, we should,
So, Madam Chair, I've
But,
always
yeah.
been advised that if the applicant's requesting an extension or consenting to that, that we have just a brief written statement.
they can send you an email or what have you, correct?
So just for clarify that,
The applicant has agreed to an
Mr.
extension.
Prescott, representing the hospital, is consenting to an extension to November 10th.
We all have degrees of duress.
November 10th? Then wouldn't you want it to be a day or two after for some reason?
The vote is what matters, not the reducing it to a physical paper recording. It's really the vote.
So again, if you had a quorum issue that evening, we would ask for a further extension.
All right, so we are set, good. And then before we have a motion to adjourn, I just had a couple of things in terms of staff. A reminder that the board had asked for a site visit for that project in the SMD. And it would be nice for us to have a list of things, as Paul mentioned, that we need to get ahead of in our work sessions. I know that we've talked about changes to the subdivision regulations, particularly with regard to setbacks, landscape regulations that I'm constantly bringing up. But anyway, wanted to make sure those 3 things were mentioned this evening on our list.
Yeah, I would add to that list, I think we still need to think about that inclusion of stormwater features in the buildable or the yield calculation.
Paul, you're referencing easements for stormwater and such to be more effectively clarified in the regulations too?
Yeah, my feeling is if it's a stormwater utility, it serves a purpose. It is a use of the land, and therefore it isn't buildable land, and it shouldn't be part of the yield calculation. But I think currently it is.
Well, remember that when we get a yield plan, it's existing conditions yeah, you're right, not taking into account drainage improvements or things of that nature. I was reckoning back to another project where there were BMPs on the property that were covered by an easement, and we were looking to provide clarifying language to effectively exclude the easement area from the land suitable for development. So it was similar to what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And also the LID self-assessment language that we distributed at the last meeting with regard to Lorraine Joubert at URI.
Madam Chair, I do have 2 additional items.
Okay.
Before you adjourn. Just for clarity, it was your intent to table action on the South County Healthcare application to a special meeting to be held on November 10th?
I wouldn't say table, I would say provide direction to staff to prepare a motion as discussed.
Thank you.
Why don't we put that in the form of a motion?
I'll second that motion.
Peter and Paul. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 And we do need a TRC volunteer also.
TRC, and then the last is, we are entering the holidays. November, you have a special meeting that we will schedule on the 10th, a regular meeting scheduled for the 22nd, and then we hit December. So I don't know if it was the intent of the board to have one meeting in December on the 13th, either be a work session or a regular meeting, or whether you intended to meet on December 27th.
I mean, I think we need to think about what is in the pipeline in terms of things for a regular meeting, and then how much can we get accomplished in our November meeting. What's before us for work session items. I think that's the thing.
So would it be safe to say that your intent is to have one meeting in December, and we determine
We kind of like to do that.
Yeah.
what form it takes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would just like to convey that we may need to have some additional flexibility with that. There are several fairly substantial applications that are not complete. I can't anticipate when they will be complete.
Of course not.
And once they are complete, we have to schedule and we have to advertise. So that we might have to think on our feet a little bit as things progress.
Well, better, if that does happen, better earlier in the month than later, I would say, yes. In terms of December, yeah.
What's on the TRC agenda? Is it good stuff that's really interesting, or is it really long?
Yet to be determined. Stay tuned.
The answer is yes.
Does that mean?
That you didn't even have to meet.
It is always interesting.
Made up for it last time.
It is always interesting.
Yeah, there were a number of applications last TRC that were continued to next month.
And what is the date for the TRC?
November 9th or 8th? 9th? Yes.
I will do it. Can I get back to you on the time?
Sure.
Okay. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Oh, you guys, you also need a person?
Yes.
Maria.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
I mean, I would have.
I like doing TRC. I watched the TRC meeting, the last one. Or I shouldn't say that, I listened to it.